Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving home later than I meant to, coming back from my sister's place outside of town. It was one of those unplanned visits that runs long without anyone noticing. By the time I left, it was close to midnight and the fog had rolled in thick while we were inside. The road back to my place was a two-lane highway that cut through farmland and patches of woods. No streetlights, just reflectors on the guardrails and the occasional mailbox flashing by. I drove it all the time, knew every bend and dip without thinking. That night, the fog sat low and heavy, not swirling so much as hanging there like it had weight. My headlights carved out a short tunnel in front of the car, everything beyond that swallowed up. I slowed down more than usual, radio off, window cracked just enough to hear the tires on the pavement. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the fog ahead looked different. Thicker, maybe. Not darker, exactly, just uneven, like there was a gap or a shadow inside it. I eased off the gas. At first, I thought it was a low cloud drifting across the road, or maybe exhaust from a truck I couldn't see yet. But as I got closer, the shape didn't move. It stayed right where it was, suspended above the asphalt, maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead. It wasn't touching the ground. That's what made my stomach tighten. It was dark, darker than the fog around it, like a chunk of night had been cut out and hung there, no sharp edges. Just a bulky, uneven shape, wide enough to stretch across most of the lane. It hovered a few feet above the road, low enough that my headlights brushed the bottom of it but didn't light it up. I slowed to a crawl without fully deciding to. My first clear thought was that something had fallen off a truck. A tarp, maybe. But it wasn't sagging. It wasn't flapping. It didn't react to the wind from my car at all. I remember checking my mirrors, thinking maybe I was about to hit smoke from a fire or dust kicked up by farm equipment. But there was no smell, no movement. The shape stayed perfectly still. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I was aware of my breathing getting shallow, fast. The inside of the car felt too quiet, like the sound was being absorbed. I rolled the window down another inch, then stopped. Something about the air outside felt wrong. Not cold or warm, just empty. I came to a full stop. The car idled softly beneath me, headlights on, fog pressing in from all sides. The shape hung there, blocking the road. I stared at it for a long time, long enough that the urge to turn around crept in, slow and insistent. I checked the clock on the dash. It was working. The seconds were ticking forward like normal. I thought about getting out of the car and immediately dismissed the idea. I didn't even reach for the door handle. The idea of standing under that thing made my chest feel tight. Instead, I nudged the car forward. The headlights pushed deeper into the fog, brushing the lower edge of the shape. Still no reflection, no detail, just absence. Then, as I got close enough that I should have been directly under it, the fog thinned all at once. Not gradually, not drifting away. It was like someone had erased it. 1 second, the shape was there, hovering over the road. The next, the air ahead was clear, and the road stretched empty and familiar in front of me. I slammed the brakes hard enough to jolt myself against the seatbelt. There was nothing there. No debris. No marks on the pavement. No shadow. Just open road, the faint glow of my headlights, and fields disappearing into darkness on either side. The fog behind me stayed thick. Ahead of me, it was clear for a long stretch, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I sat there with my foot on the brake, heart pounding, scanning the road, the ditches, the sky above the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound except my engine and my own breathing. After a few seconds, the fog began creeping forward again, slowly filling in the space ahead, like it was reclaiming it. I didn't wait. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, barely aware of my speed, eyes flicking constantly between the road and the edges of the fog. Every time the headlights caught a thicker patch, my pulse jumped. When I got home, I sat in the driveway longer than usual, engine still running, listening. The neighborhood was quiet, normal. Porch lights, a dog barking somewhere far off. Inside, everything felt slightly off. Not wrong in a dramatic way, just muted, like the house was holding its breath. I checked the windows, the locks, the back door. Everything was fine. I barely slept. The next morning, I drove that same stretch of road in daylight. Clear sky, no fog, nothing out of place. I even pulled over near where I thought it had happened and walked along the shoulder, feeling stupid the whole time. There was nothing. No scorch marks, no broken grass, no sign that anything had ever been there. I told myself it was fog playing tricks on my eyes, that I'd been tired, that the darkness had filled in gaps my brain couldn't handle. But a week later, I ran into a guy named Trevor at the gas station near my work. We weren't close, just the kind of people who recognized each other from around town. He mentioned the fog the other night, how bad it had been on the highway. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Weird fog." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Did you see anything strange?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. Probably nothing. Thought I saw something over the road, like a shadow or something. Then it was gone." I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just nodded and said, "Fog does that." Since then, I've driven that road dozens of times. Most nights, it's just a road, just fog, just darkness and headlights. But every once in a while, when the fog is thick and the world narrows down to that small tunnel of light, I get this feeling that I'm approaching something, like the road is about to end in midair. When that happens, I slow down without thinking, and I keep my eyes forward. I don't look too hard into the fog anymore. The first alert came at 2:17 a.m., and it woke me up because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the nightstand. I fumbled for it, half asleep, already annoyed. We'd had false alarms before. Moths, rain, a raccoon once. I expected the same thing. The notification just said motion detected, side yard camera. I opened the app, squinting at the screen. The clip loaded, grainy black and white footage from the infrared camera. It showed the side of my house, the fence line, the trash bins. Nothing was moving. Then, for about half a second, the entire frame washed out in white. Not like headlights or a flashlight. It was more like the exposure spiked all at once. Then it went back to normal. That was it. I scrubbed back and replayed it 3 times. Same thing. No shapes, no shadows, no person. Just that brief flash, like the camera blinked. I checked the timestamp. 2:70 a.m., I set the phone down and tried to go back to sleep. I remember lying there thinking about how quiet the house felt. No AC kicking on, no cars passing. Even the usual hum from the fridge seemed distant. I eventually fell asleep again. The next morning, while making coffee, I checked the system on the tablet in the kitchen. There were 3 alerts overnight, all from the same camera, all at 2:17 a.m. on the dot. Each clip showed the same thing. Nothing, then a flash. I mentioned it to my wife, Erin, while she was packing lunches for the kids. "Probably a bug flying close to the lens," she said without looking up. "Or a software thing." "Every night at the exact same second?" I asked. She shrugged. "Reboot it later." I forgot about it for most of the day. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I didn't tell Erin why. I just said I couldn't sleep and ended up on the couch with the TV on low. Around 2:10, I muted it and waited. The house creaked like it always did. Pipes ticking, the faint rush of cars on the highway a mile away. At 2:17, my phone buzzed. Side yard camera. I opened the app immediately. Same flash, same empty frame. What I hadn't noticed before was the sound. There was audio on the clip. Normally it was just ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, maybe a dog barking somewhere. This time during the flash, there was a low click. Not loud, not sharp, more like a soft electrical tap. I replayed it, volume up, click, then nothing. I got up and walked to the kitchen window that looked out onto the side yard. The night was clear, no motion lights on, no cars, just the fence and the neighbor's dark house beyond it. I stood there for a while, listening. Everything sounded normal again. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Always 2:17 a.m., same camera, same flash, same quiet click. I checked the system logs, no errors, no firmware updates, no explanation. I repositioned the camera, cleaned the lens, adjusted sensitivity. Nothing changed. On the 4th night, a second camera triggered. The one pointed at the backyard. Same time, same flash, 2 different angles, 2 different views, both washed out at the same instant. The flashes weren't identical either. The backyard one looked slightly dimmer, like it was farther from whatever caused it. That's when I started feeling genuinely unsettled. I showed Erin the clips the next morning. She frowned, watching them back to back. "That's weird," she said, "but it's probably just some glitch." "Why only at night?" I asked. "Why the same minute?" She didn't answer that. I checked the kids' room cameras next. No alerts, no flashes, just normal footage. On the sixth night, I stayed awake again. This time, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, watching the live feed from the side yard camera. 2:16 a.m. came and went. At 2:17 exactly, the live feed didn't flash. Instead, it froze. The image locked in place for about 1 second, then updated. The motion alert came through a half second later, like the system was catching up. The recording showed the flash, the live feed never did. That messed with me more than the flashes themselves. I stepped outside onto the back porch without thinking. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, even though the forecast was clear. I looked up. The sky over our house looked wrong. Not dramatically, just slightly brighter than it should have been. Like the darkness had been thinned out. It faded after a few seconds. I went back inside, heart pounding, and locked the door. The next day, I called the security company. They ran diagnostics remotely, told me everything looked normal, suggested maybe nearby electrical interference. "From what?" I asked. "Could be anything," the guy said. "Power lines, industrial equipment, even atmospheric stuff." We didn't live near any of that. On the eighth night, I noticed something new. The timestamp on the clip still read 2:17 a.m., but the duration was longer. Instead of a single flash, there were two. The first was faint, the second was brighter. Between them, the camera picked up a brief distortion. The image warped slightly, like heat shimmer, even though it was cold out. The audio caught something else too, a low tone just under the range where you're sure you're hearing it. It lasted maybe half a second. I didn't sleep after that. On the ninth night, Erin woke up around 2:20 and found me standing in the hallway staring at my phone. "Are you okay?" she asked. "It happened again," I said. She watched the clip, then looked at me differently than before. Less dismissive, more careful. "Did you go outside?" she asked. "No." She nodded, like she'd already been worried about that. On the 10th night, every exterior camera triggered at once. Front yard, side yard, backyard. All at 2:17 a.m. The flashes weren't uniform. The front yard camera showed the brightest one yet, a clean white burst that erased the image completely for a full second. The side yard showed the usual washout. The backyard barely flashed at all. None of them showed a source. I checked the timestamps again. All exactly the same. What scared me most wasn't the light. It was the stillness afterward. No wind noise, no insects. Even the audio felt hollow, like something had sucked the sound out of the space for a moment. After that night, the alerts stopped. No flashes, no clicks, nothing. The cameras went back to normal, like nothing had ever happened. I told myself it was over, that whatever glitch it was had resolved itself. 2 weeks later, I checked the system logs while deleting old footage. There was an entry I didn't recognize, no camera name, no clip attached, just a system note at 2:17 a.m., motion event acknowledged. That phrase didn't appear anywhere else in the logs. Ever. I scrolled back through months of data, nothing like it. That same night, I stood in the backyard just before going to bed, looking up at the sky. It was overcast, stars hidden. The darkness felt thicker directly above the house, like a low ceiling. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed once. No alert, just a vibration. I looked at the cameras the next morning. No footage, but every exterior camera showed the exact same timestamp gap. 1 second missing. Cleanly cut, like it had been removed. Nothing else has happened since. The system works, the alerts are normal, life goes on. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I check the time without meaning to. And if it's close to 2:17, I don't look at my phone. I just lie there, listening, waiting to see if the house will go quiet again. I was driving west on Route 26, the long, empty stretch that cuts through scrub and low hills before the land flattens out. It was late, not quite night yet, but the sun was gone and the sky had that deep blue color that makes everything feel farther away than it is. The weather was clear and still. No wind. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every sound your car makes. I'd been on the road for a couple of hours, coming back from visiting my sister, and I was tired in that dull, floaty way where your thoughts start to wander. I turned the radio on mostly to stay awake. There wasn't much on. A country station faded in and out, then static, then nothing. I didn't bother fixing it. I let it scan. That was when I noticed the sound. Between stations, instead of just static, there was a faint tone. Not loud, not sharp. It came in pulses, steady and even, like a slow electronic heartbeat. It wasn't music, no melody, just a soft repeating at the same interval. At first, I thought it was something wrong with the speakers. I tapped the dash with my knuckles. The tone didn't change. I adjusted the volume. It got louder and quieter, but the rhythm stayed perfect. I glanced at the display. The radio was still scanning, sliding through empty frequencies, but the tone stayed there, sitting underneath everything else. When a station briefly came in, the tone dropped out. As soon as it faded, the tone returned. I remember thinking it sounded intentional, like it was being broadcast on purpose, but not meant to be heard directly. The road was empty in both directions. No headlights ahead, none behind. Just my car cutting through the dark. After a few minutes, I started to feel irritated by it. The repetition got under my skin. I reached to turn the radio off, then stopped. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or that quiet sense that if I interrupted it, I'd miss something. I kept driving. The land opened up on the right side, where the hills dropped away into a wide basin. I could see miles out there. The horizon was a clean line, dark earth against darker sky. That's when I noticed the light. It was far away, low and faint, sitting just above the horizon. At first I thought it was a town. There were a few small ones out that way, but this light wasn't spread out. It was a single glow, soft-edged and steady, like a distant dome. It didn't flicker. It didn't move. It just sat there. The tone on the radio continued, perfectly in time. I checked my mirrors. Still no cars. I looked at my phone on the passenger seat. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but I remember noticing it anyway. As I drove, the light slowly lowered, not like it was setting, more like it was sinking. The horizon didn't change. The light did. The tone on the radio began to feel louder, even though I hadn't touched the volume. I could feel it more than hear it, a gentle vibration through the steering wheel and the seat. It wasn't unpleasant, just noticeable. I tried to time it. The pulse matched nothing I recognized. Not my turn signal. Not the engine. It was its own thing. I told myself it was a radio tower and atmospheric interference. I said it out loud, just to hear a human voice. The words sounded thin in the car. The light continued to sink. I realized then that I'd passed the turnoff I usually used. The reflective sign was a mile back, barely visible in my rearview mirror. I didn't remember seeing it at all. That bothered me more than the light. I slowed down slightly, heart starting to pick up, and watched the glow. As it dropped closer to the horizon, the tone on the radio stretched out. The rhythm stayed the same, but each pulse seemed to linger longer, like it was dragging. My ears felt full, like when you change elevation too fast. The light reached the horizon and paused. Half of it was gone now, like it was being swallowed by the land. The remaining half dimmed but didn't change shape. The tone stopped, not faded, not cut off, just stopped, mid-pulse. The sudden silence was so complete that I flinched. The radio was still on, still scanning, but now it was just static and empty air. A second later, the light slipped fully below the horizon and vanished. I pulled over without really deciding to. The car rolled onto the shoulder and I shut off the engine. The quiet pressed in immediately. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise. It felt like everything had taken a step back. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening to my own breathing. After maybe 30 seconds, sound returned in pieces. A faint breeze, the ticking of the cooling engine. Somewhere far off, a low rumble that might have been another car miles away. I turned the radio off completely. I stayed there for a while, staring at the horizon, waiting for the light to come back. It didn't. The sky darkened normally, stars starting to show. When I finally drove again, I was more alert than I'd been all night. I didn't miss any more signs. The turnoff appeared where it should, bright and obvious, like it always was. I got home without incident. The next morning, I checked the car. The radio worked fine. No weird sounds. No memory of the tone saved anywhere. I drove back the same route a week later during the day. Nothing unusual. Just scrub and sky. I didn't tell my sister about it. I didn't write it down right away. I kept thinking I'd remember it wrong if I waited too long. Sometimes now, when I'm driving late and the radio scans between stations, I hold my breath for a second, just to see if that rhythm comes back. The fire had burned down to a soft orange bed, the kind that should have been perfect for the night. I tossed on 2 more split logs anyway, more out of habit than need, then sat back on the cooler to wait for them to catch. They didn't. The logs just sat there, blackening slowly like the heat wasn't really reaching them. No crackle, no smoke, just a dull glow underneath, steady and stubborn. I leaned forward and poked at it with a stick. The coals were hot. I could feel it on my face, but the flame wouldn't rise. It was strange enough that I checked the wood, thinking maybe it was damp, but it snapped when I pressed it, dry as anything. I was camping alone near Alder Ridge, a little spur trail off a forest road in northern Idaho. I'd been there once before years ago with my friend Mason. This time it was just me, a small tent, and one clear September night. No wind. Cool, quiet. The kind of place where sound carries too well. I added a 3rd log. Still nothing. Okay, I muttered, annoyed. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. No insects. No wind in the trees. Even the far-off creek I'd heard earlier had gone silent. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I glanced toward the tree line without really knowing why. Above it, just barely clearing the dark outline of the pines, there was a dim light. Not bright, not sharp, more like a soft gray dot the color of ash, hovering where the stars should have been. It didn't move, it didn't flicker, it just sat there, steady and wrong. I stood up slowly. At first I thought it might be a satellite, but it was too low, and it didn't drift. I watched it for a good 10 seconds, holding my breath without realizing it. Then it pulsed. Just once, not a flash, more like it inhaled and exhaled light. A gentle brightening and dimming over in less than a second. At the exact same moment, the fire exploded back to life. Flames shot up, tall and sudden, licking higher than they had all evening. Heat rolled over me, sharp enough that I took a step back instinctively. I looked down at the fire, heart pounding, then snapped my eyes back up to the tree line. The light was gone. The forest sound rushed back all at once, like someone had unmuted the world. Crickets. A breeze through the needles. The creek, faint but steady. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the timing. Coincidence. Brain filling in gaps. But my hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop staring at the spot where the light had been. I forced myself to sit back down. The fire was roaring now, perfectly normal, snapping and popping like it should have earlier. I stared into it, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself I was tired. I'd hiked most of the afternoon. I hadn't slept great the night before. People see weird stuff in the woods all the time when they're alone. Still, I didn't add any more wood. I ate my dinner without much appetite, eyes drifting to the tree line every few seconds. Nothing else happened. The fire behaved. The night stayed normal. Eventually, I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, leaving the rainfly open so I could see the stars. Sleep didn't come easily. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because I felt too warm. At first, I thought the fire must have flared again, but when I unzipped the tent a few inches, I saw it had burned down to embers like it should have. No unusual heat. What bothered me was the air. It felt thick, pressed, like standing too close to a generator or heavy equipment. Not loud, just a low physical sensation, more felt than heard. I sat up and listened. Nothing. Then I realized the stars directly above my campsite looked dimmer. Not gone, just muted, as if a thin layer of smoke or cloud covered only that patch of sky. The rest of the stars beyond the trees were sharp and bright. I stared at it, trying to focus my eyes. The dim area shifted slightly, not drifting like clouds, sliding. My stomach tightened. I felt stupid for thinking it, but it was like something large was passing overhead, blocking the sky without blocking the light completely. I watched it move off, slow and smooth, until the stars snapped back to normal all at once. The pressure in the air faded with it. I sat there heart racing, telling myself not to panic. Nothing had touched me. Nothing had made a sound. I was still safe in my little circle of light and nylon. Eventually, exhaustion won out and I slept. Morning came clear and cold. Everything looked normal. No scorch marks, no strange smells, no dead animals. The fire ring looked exactly like it should after a night of burning. If it weren't for how vividly I remembered that pulse of light and the fire flaring in response. I might have laughed it off by breakfast. I packed up earlier than planned. As I hiked back toward the trailhead, I noticed my phone battery had dropped way more than it should have overnight, even though it had been in airplane mode. It wasn't dead, just drained enough to make me frown. About halfway down the trail, I stopped and realized something else. My watch was 7 minutes fast. I hadn't set it wrong. I was sure of that. I'd checked it against my phone the night before. I stood there in the trees listening to my own breathing, trying to remember if I'd woken up during the night again. If I'd checked the time, if I'd felt anything else strange. There was just a gap. Not a dramatic blank, just nothing to recall. I made it back to my car without incident and drove home. Civilization felt louder than usual. Closer. That night, sitting on my couch, I smelled smoke and panicked for half a second before realizing it was just my jacket. The scent had soaked in deep. I washed it twice. The smell lingered. I haven't camped alone since then. Sometimes, when I'm outside at night and a fire burns a little too steady, I catch myself looking up instead of down, waiting to see if the sky responds. I woke up already holding my breath. I didn't open my eyes at first. I just lay there, completely still, with that tight, electric feeling in my chest that only comes from being absolutely sure you're not alone. Not scared in a vague way. Certain. Someone had been standing near my bed. I could feel where they'd been. On the right side, close enough that if I'd reached out, my hand would have hit something solid. The air there felt wrong, like it hadn't settled yet. Warmer, maybe, or just disturbed. I listened. No footsteps, no breathing, no floorboards creaking in the hallway. The house was silent in the normal nighttime way, refrigerator humming faintly, the soft tick of the wall clock in the living room. That made it worse. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The room looked normal. Same shadows on the walls, same dim glow from the streetlight leaking through the blinds. My dresser, my closet door, half open like I always left it. No one there. I exhaled, but it came out shaky. My heart was still racing, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't there. That sent a fresh spike of panic through me. I sat up too fast and scanned the bed, the floor, the nightstand. Then I saw it. My phone was in my hand. Not just in my hand, I was holding it upright, arm raised slightly like I'd been aiming it. The screen was on. The camera app was open, and it was pointed straight at the ceiling. I stared at it, confused enough that my fear stalled out for a second. The camera preview showed the familiar patch of ceiling above my bed, a hairline crack near the corner, nothing else. No flash, no recording indicator, just the live camera view. I checked the time, 3:08 a.m. My last clear memory before waking up was putting my phone on the nightstand around midnight and rolling over to sleep. I never slept with it in my hand. Ever. I lowered the phone slowly and looked at the ceiling with my own eyes. Nothing. I switched the camera to video and checked the gallery. No new videos, no photos, nothing recorded since earlier that evening. I sat there for a long time, trying to replay the moment of waking up, trying to remember if I'd heard anything or felt something specific. All I could remember was that certainty, that someone had been there, close enough to matter. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I told myself it had been a stress dream. I'd been working late all week, not eating great, too much screen time, the usual list of things you blame when your brain does something unsettling. I went about my day mostly fine, but I kept catching myself glancing at my phone, half expecting it to be open to the camera again. That night, I put it face down on the nightstand before bed. I even slid it a little farther away than usual. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. This time, I knew exactly why. The room felt crowded, not visually, spatially, like the air had been pushed inward, compressed. My ears felt full, the way they do before pressure changes on a plane. I opened my eyes immediately. Still nothing there. My phone was in my hand again. Camera app open. Pointed at the ceiling. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I sat up, scrambling back against the headboard, almost dropping the phone in the process. I checked the screen more carefully this time. The ceiling in the preview didn't look exactly like the ceiling above me. It was the same crack, same angle, but the lighting was off, just slightly. The shadows were softer, like the light source wasn't coming from the street lamp anymore. I looked up again with my own eyes. The real ceiling looked sharper, higher contrast, like two versions of the same image, out of sync. I lowered the phone. The preview adjusted instantly to match reality. I stared at the screen, then slowly raised it again. For half a second, just a half, the camera lagged. The image on the phone showed the ceiling as it had been a moment earlier. Then it caught up. I don't know how long I sat there testing it, lifting and lowering my arm, watching that tiny delay. It wasn't dramatic. It was barely perceptible. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Eventually, the pressure in the room eased. The air felt normal again. My ears popped slightly. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. 3 minutes gone. I called in sick to work the next day. I didn't trust myself to focus. I spent most of the morning searching my phone settings, battery usage, permissions. Nothing unusual. No new apps, no background camera activity. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I dragged a blanket to the couch and left all the lights on. I told myself it was temporary, just until I felt normal again. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. anyway. This time I was on my side, facing the back of the couch. My phone was wedged between the cushions, screen glowing faintly, camera app open, pointed upward, at nothing. I started to cry then, quietly into my sleeve because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt too big, too hollow, like sound would travel too far if I made any. Over the next week, it kept happening, not every night, but often enough that I started dreading going to sleep. Always around the same time, always the same feeling, that someone had been close, watching, not touching. Sometimes the phone would be angled differently, toward the corner of the ceiling, toward the top of a doorway, once toward the hallway, never toward my face. I tried turning the phone off completely. I tried leaving it in another room. I tried powering it down and locking it in my car. When I left it in the car, I woke up with my hand raised anyway. Empty, still positioned like I'd been holding something. The next morning, my phone was back on the nightstand, turned on, camera app open, pointed up. That was when I noticed something else. My battery history showed activity during the night, small spikes. Camera usage for a few minutes at a time, always ending around 3:11 a.m. I asked my friend Elena if she'd ever sleepwalked with her phone. She laughed and said no, then paused and asked why. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to sound half normal. She suggested a carbon monoxide detector. I bought one that afternoon. It never went off. A few nights later, I woke up to the familiar pressure and decided not to move. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't reach for the phone. I just listened. The room wasn't silent this time. There was a faint sound, so low I felt it more than heard it. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like a distant engine idling somewhere underground. The pressure deepened. I became aware of a presence again. Not a shape, not a figure, just a sense of proximity, like someone standing too close behind you in line. My phone shifted in my hand. I hadn't realized I was holding it. I felt my arm lift slightly, guided, careful, like whoever was doing it didn't want to wake me fully. The sound intensified for a moment, then stopped. The pressure vanished. The room snapped back to normal. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. I opened my eyes. The phone was aimed at the ceiling. Camera app open. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. I don't sleep with my phone in the room anymore. I don't sleep much at all, honestly. Sometimes when I'm lying there awake, staring at the ceiling, I get the sense that whatever was there before hasn't gone away, that it's just learned it doesn't need the camera anymore, because it already knows exactly where I am. I was somewhere between Gallup and Farmington when it happened, on that long, empty stretch of Highway 491 where the mesas fade into open desert and the sky feels bigger than anything else around you. It was close to 1 a.m. I'd been driving for hours, trying to make it to my cousin's place before morning. The air was dry enough that my lips felt cracked, and the only light came from my headlights, and the insane number of stars you get in that part of New Mexico. There were no other cars. Not for miles. I kept checking the rearview mirror out of habit, but every time it was the same. Black behind me, black in front of me, and a thin line of road lit up by my high beams. The stars were bright that night, sharp and clear, like you could reach up and grab one if you stood on the roof of your car. I was half listening to some late-night radio hosts talk about baseball trades when the signal cut to static for a second. I didn't think much of it. Radio does that out there, but then the static didn't come back to music. It just went quiet. Not off. I could hear the faint hum of the electronics, but it wasn't picking up anything anymore. I tapped the console. Nothing. That's when the air changed. Not the temperature. Something else. Like the atmosphere itself got heavier, pushing down on the car just slightly. The engine sounded the same, but the silence around me felt layered, like there was something big above me, absorbing the sound instead of reflecting it. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel a little tighter, and then the stars dimmed, not flickered, not faded gradually. They dimmed in a smooth, coordinated wave that passed over me from the south to the north. It was like watching a dark veil slide across the sky, blotting out the brightness as it went. If I hadn't been staring straight ahead, I might have missed the start of it, but I caught enough to see that it moved like a single unit, one giant shadow crossing the sky. I slowed the car without thinking, dropped from 70 to around 50. The air felt thick, like the pressure was building in my ears. More stars dimmed overhead. It looked like something enormous was passing between me and the sky, blocking light as it moved. But there was no shape I could make out. No outline, no edges, just the stars disappearing behind something invisible. I stuck my head forward to see through the windshield better, heart pounding. For maybe 2 seconds, the strip of night directly above me went dark, completely dark. Nothing but black, like space had shut off. And then, just as smoothly as it had dimmed, the stars brightened again. Not in a wave this time. Every single one snapped back to full brightness at exactly the same moment, like someone had flicked a switch. The pressure in my ears vanished. The night sound returned. You don't hear much out there, but the silence felt normal again instead of heavy. The radio came back on mid-sentence. I didn't breathe for a few seconds, just kept staring upward through the windshield, scanning for anything that could explain what I saw. A plane? Impossible. Nothing that big flies that low, and there were no lights. A cloud? There were no clouds. Not even wisps. Just crystal clear desert sky. Something else occurred to me then. A thought I didn't want to think, that whatever passed overhead hadn't just blocked the stars. It had absorbed them. The light hadn't gone hazy or distorted. It had disappeared. I forced myself to keep driving. My hands were shaking enough that I gripped the wheel tighter so the car wouldn't drift. I glanced in the mirrors every few seconds. Nothing. No light behind me. No movement in the dark outside the beam of my headlights. 5 minutes later, the radio cut out again. A half-second of silence. Then it resumed. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It flickered once, went blank, then came back. The time was the same as before. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than the stars dimming. The idea that something messed with the electronics in a way I didn't understand. A little farther down the highway, the pressure in my ears returned for a moment, just a small pop, like changing elevation. I checked the sky again, half expecting to see another wave of darkness. Nothing looked different. But the feeling lingered like the air was remembering something. When I passed the only gas station on that stretch, the sign flickered twice as I approached, even though the lights looked fine from far away. As soon as I drove past, they glowed steady again. No one else was around. About 20 minutes later, I finally saw a pair of headlights in the distance behind me. They were too far to judge anything, just faint dots on the horizon. But when I glanced back again, the headlights were gone. Not faded, not turned off. Gone. A chill ran up my spine. I sped up, trying not to think about it, trying not to imagine whatever had passed above me circling back. When I got to Farmington, the first thing I did was pull into a well-lit gas station. I didn't buy anything at first. I just sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, listening. The radio worked fine. The air felt normal. The sky above town had that faint glow from light pollution, which weirdly made me feel safer. You can't see many stars in town, which meant I couldn't watch for them dimming again. Eventually, I went inside and grabbed a soda just to do something normal. The cashier asked if I was okay because apparently I looked pale. I told him I'd just driven a long stretch alone and needed to shake it off. He laughed and said nighttime desert drives always make people edgy. I didn't respond. When I finally got to my cousin's place, he was asleep. I lay on the couch, still wired, glancing out the window every few minutes, even though the blinds were down. I kept replaying the moment the stars vanished. How smooth the wave of darkness was, how coordinated, how impossible it seemed that anything physical could do that. But what got me the most was the silence that followed. That few seconds where the whole world seemed to hold still, waiting for the sky to come back. Even now, weeks later, whenever I drive at night and look up at the stars, I catch myself bracing for them to dim again. Not flicker, not disappear behind clouds, but dim in that perfect sweeping motion, as if something huge and silent is passing overhead, blotting out the universe for a moment before letting it return all at once. I was driving back to my place outside Tillamook after visiting a friend in town, taking the back roads because the main highway was thick with late-season tourists. It was close to midnight, and a heavy fog had rolled in from the coast, one of those dense, wet blankets that swallow sound and make the trees loom twice their size. My wipers were on the lowest setting, brushing away mist more than rain. I'd taken this road hundreds of times. It wound between patches of forest and small open fields, eventually dropping down toward my cabin near the river. The fog didn't bother me. What bothered me was how quiet everything felt. Even with the windows up, I usually heard frogs or the ocean wind drifting inland, maybe a distant truck on 101. But that night, there was nothing. Just the soft hum of my engine and the steady click of the wipers. I rounded a bend where the forest rises sharply on both sides, the trees forming tall walls of dark shapes. That was when a cluster of lights appeared above the tree line. At first, I thought it was a plane banking low, but these lights were too slow, too smooth, and too close. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them. Soft, white-yellow dots arranged loosely in a curve. Not twinkling, not bright, just steady. They glowed through the fog in this muted, almost unreal way, like lanterns behind frosted glass. I'd never seen lights like that above the woods. I eased my foot off the gas, but didn't stop. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a helicopter, or maybe a group of paragliders with LED rigs, even though that made no sense at all at midnight in thick coastal fog. The lights moved together, not rigid, not perfectly aligned, but with a kind of shared rhythm. Imagine how small fish move in a group, drifting in the same direction without touching. That's what it reminded me of. They floated slowly above the tree line on my left, maybe 30 feet above the highest branches. No sound, no breeze, no engine hum, just that steady drift. I rolled down the window halfway. Silence. Total silence. Even the usual drip of moisture from the branches seemed absent. The air was wet and cold, hitting my face in little pinpricks, but it carried no noise at all. The lights shifted slightly, turning, or maybe rotating, I couldn't tell. The fog distorted their edges, making them look like soft orbs instead of sharp points. They passed over the road ahead of me, slow and deliberate, moving toward the opposite side of the forest. I stopped the car without realizing it. My headlights lit up the fog in front of me, creating that tunnel effect where you can only see a few feet ahead. The lights above cut through it more cleanly somehow, like the fog bent around them instead of swallowing them. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lights began to descend, not drastically, just a few feet, but enough that I caught myself gripping the wheel tighter. They hovered there for a moment, swaying almost imperceptibly, and I felt the same sensation you get when someone stands behind you without speaking. A kind of awareness, pressure, attention, whatever you want to call it. Then the fog shifted. A light breeze rolled in from the west, thinning the mist in pieces. My headlights reached farther. I blinked, trying to clear the moisture from my eyelashes. When I looked up again, the lights were gone. The tree line was dark and empty. The fog drifted across the branches like normal. Nothing moved above them. I rolled the window all the way down, listening. Still nothing. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were waiting for something. I swallowed and stepped out of the car, not sure what I expected to hear or see. The gravel under my boots sounded sharper than usual. My breath formed a shaky cloud in the air. I walked a few steps toward the ditch at the edge of the road. The smell of damp earth was strong, almost metallic. The forest loomed on both sides, black and impenetrable. Something snapped, a twig or a branch, deep among the trees on my right. I froze. The sound echoed far too cleanly through the fog, like the forest had been holding its breath until that moment. I strained my ears, but no follow-up sound came. The woods didn't return to their normal rustling, they just stayed unnaturally still. A soft vibration passed through the air. Not loud, more like the faint hum of distant machinery, but there was no machinery out there. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then faded. I backed up toward the car, not taking my eyes off the tree line. The fog thickened again as the breeze died. The whole atmosphere seemed to close in. Once inside the car, I locked the doors, which felt ridiculous, considering whatever I'd seen wasn't the kind of thing a lock would matter to, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. I turned the headlights off for a moment, just to see if the darkness revealed anything. Nothing. Just black trees and shifting fog. When I turned the headlights back on, my rearview mirror flashed white for a split second, like something reflective had caught the beam. I whipped around to look out the back window, but all I saw was fog and faint outlines of trees. I don't know why, but I started driving without checking my directions. Instinct more than logic. The fog swallowed the road in front of me, but I kept going exactly the speed needed to avoid outdriving my headlights. My fingers felt numb on the wheel. For the next mile, the forest remained silent. Too silent. Even as the fog thinned near the river turnoff, the usual chorus of frogs was absent. No owls, no rustling, just the sound of my tires on damp pavement. Right before I reached my driveway, the woods behind me lit up faintly. Not a flash, not bright, just a soft glow filtering through the fog, like the lights were drifting somewhere beyond the trees again. I didn't stop to look. I pulled into my drive, hurried inside, and double-checked every lock, even though it made no logical sense. Much later that night, when I finally looked out the window toward the tree line, the fog had mostly lifted. The forest looked normal again, peaceful, untouched. But the quiet lingered until sunrise. Too deep, too whole, as if the woods hadn't yet decided it was safe to make noise again. And even now, whenever fog rolls in from the coast and settles low over the trees, I catch myself watching for those soft, drifting lights to reappear, not bright enough to scare me outright, but strange enough to make me question whether they were ever meant to be seen at all. I was out behind my apartment complex when it happened, standing in the patchy grass by the dumpsters, trying to coax my neighbor's cat down from the fence. It was around 11, cool for early September, and the moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. The cat, a skittish orange thing named Murphy, had bolted from the stairwell when I opened the door and climbed the fence like he'd been training for it. His owner, Dave, was out of town for the week, and I'd promised to look after him. I had just gotten Murphy's attention. He was making that weird chirping noise cats do at bugs when the light changed. Not dimmed, not brightened, just changed, like someone had quietly adjusted the color temperature of the night without asking permission. I looked up at the moon. It was high and full, clean white against a clear sky, and then something slid across it. I didn't see where it started, only the moment it entered the frame of the moon's glow. A dark shape, drifting slowly, no sound, no fluttering, no change in outline. Too smooth to be a bird, too big, too steady. It crossed from right to left, blocking a perfect crescent of the moon for maybe 2 seconds. Then it slipped off the other side and vanished into the darkness. Murphy hissed. A low, tiny hiss, like he wasn't sure he wanted to commit to being upset. My first thought was, drone, but it hadn't moved like one. No blinking, no dipping or rising, no buzzing. It had been more like a shadow passing under a street lamp. Except the street lamp was the moon, and the shadow had been huge. I stared at the empty patch of sky for a few seconds. Nothing. The moon looked normal again. The air felt normal. The only sound was a car turning into the parking lot behind the building. Murphy jumped off the fence and bolted toward the stairs. I followed, not running, but walking faster than usual. Inside my apartment, I turned off the lights and went straight to the sliding balcony door. I pulled the blinds apart with 2 fingers and looked up at the moon again, expecting I don't know what. A second pass, maybe. Some lingering outline. But the sky was clear. I stood there for a while, watching. Nothing moved except a few bats near the trees by the creek. I told myself to let it go. It was late. Maybe my depth perception was off. Maybe it was just a goose flying higher than it looked. I made some tea, fed Murphy, opened my laptop, tried to distract myself. It didn't work. Around midnight, I went back outside. Not because I wanted to see something again, but because avoiding it felt worse. The air was colder than before. There was a breeze now carrying that damp, earthy smell from the creek. I walked out to the edge of the parking lot where the streetlights didn't reach. The moon was still bright, still high, no shadows in front of it. I stayed out there for a few minutes, breathing slowly, listening. A few cicadas, a car on the highway a mile away. Nothing strange. Then, just as I was about to go inside, the breeze stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The leaves on the trees froze mid-rustle. The air settled unnaturally fast into a kind of heavy stillness. I could hear my own breathing again. Something in the sky dimmed. Not the moon this time, but the stars to the left of it. 3 or 4 of them faded a little, then brightened again a second later, almost like something had passed in front of them and kept going. I didn't move. I didn't even think to. I just stared up, waiting for another sign of movement. Another shadow. Another dimming. Nothing. I went inside and locked the balcony door, which I never did. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I woke up, I checked the ceiling like I expected light patterns to be there. Nothing ever was, but the feeling stuck with me. The next night, I walked Murphy before bed. He liked the routine, and so did I, usually. It was windy this time, and the moon was half hidden by fast-moving clouds. I was trying to fix one of Murphy's jingly toys that had snagged on the leash when I felt something. Felt, not heard. The air pressure shifted again. Not enough to hurt, just enough to notice. Like the atmosphere briefly stretched or compressed. Murphy stopped walking. His head snapped upward. Every muscle in his little body went rigid. His tail puffed so fast it startled me. I followed his gaze. The clouds above us were sliding east, thick and layered. And between 2 of those layers, for a brief moment, something darker moved. Not the color of a cloud. Clouds have texture, edges, thickness. This thing was uniform, smooth. A flat shape gliding across. Wasn't lit. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was just dark. The same darkness I'd seen pass over the moon the night before, but this time it was above my building, close enough that I could judge its size. Bigger than I'd thought, much bigger. It moved slower than the clouds, drifting on a different path, and then the clouds folded over it, and it was gone. The wind resumed instantly. Murphy bolted so hard I nearly dropped the leash. I rushed him inside. I didn't even take off my shoes. I sat on the floor of the living room with him hiding under the coffee table, staring at the sliding door like something was going to press its face, or whatever, against it. I checked the time, 12:41 a.m. I don't know why that number stuck with me, but it did. I went to the bedroom and opened the curtains. The sky looked normal again. The moon peeked through the clouds, no shadows, no shapes. I didn't sleep much. 2 nights later, I woke to a thump outside. Not loud, not metallic, more like someone had gently bumped the siding of the building. I checked the window again. Normal. But after I lay down, the room brightened faintly for half a second. A soft silver glow brushed across the wall, not from the moon, not from a passing car. This was angled wrong, too high, too soft. I sat up, heart hammering. Murphy leapt onto the bed, trembling. The glow faded instantly, gone as if it had never happened. I moved slowly to the window. The glass felt cold, colder than the room. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. The streetlights were steady. No strange reflections. The sky calm. The next morning, everything looked perfectly normal. I walked to the coffee shop down the block, trying to convince myself nothing had happened. Sunlight, traffic, people, all of it grounding and ordinary. I almost believed myself. But as I sat outside drinking my coffee, a plane crossed overhead. Small passenger jet heading toward the city. I followed it with my eyes. For half an instant, the plane disappeared behind nothing. Not a cloud, there were none. Not a glare spot, it wasn't bright enough. It just slipped behind a shape I couldn't see, a subtle distortion in the blue sky, something transparent but present. Then it came back into view. No one else reacted. I didn't say anything. Now, weeks later, the nights feel normal again. Murphy acts like himself. I haven't seen any shadows cross the moon or shapes slipping between clouds. But I do check. Every night, without meaning to, I step onto the balcony and look at the moon for a few seconds. I wait for something to drift across it, too silent, too smooth, too big. Nothing ever does. But sometimes, just before I turn away, the light around it shifts for a moment. Just a moment. Then it's gone. I was sitting by Lake Brenton just after sunset, the kind of evening where the air hangs in place and everything feels a little muted. It had been a hot day, and the ground was still giving off warmth, even though the sky had gone that deep blue-gray that comes right before full dark. I'd driven out there after work to clear my head, parked at the small public access area, and walked down to the shore with a folding chair and a cheap insulated bottle my sister gave me for my birthday. There wasn't anyone else around. It was a Tuesday, and most people didn't bother coming to that side of the lake anyway. The nicer trails and picnic areas were across the water, where the road was paved and the cell service didn't drop out. On my side, the trees grew tight. The dirt lot had potholes you could lose a tire in, and the lake smelled a little like algae. But it was quiet, and I liked that. I'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes, listening to insects, watching a few late kayakers paddle their way back toward the far dock. The sky was almost black now, except for a faint band of lighter blue on the horizon. I remember thinking the lake looked unusually still for summer. No breeze, no boat wakes, not even the occasional plunk of fish coming up for bugs. I was scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone when I heard the first sound. Not a splash. More like a soft, dull whump, almost like a hand slapping the surface from underneath. I looked up fast, expecting to see a fish jump or a turtle poke its head up. But the water was calm. Then a ripple formed about 30 feet out. Normally when something disturbs the lake, you get messy rings that spread unevenly. But this one was clean. A perfect circle, growing outward like someone dropped a stone dead center, but without the splash. The middle didn't bubble, didn't dip. It just pulsed slightly, then the ring widened. I stood up out of reflex. It was too perfect to be natural, too even. I took a few steps closer to the edge, trying to see if something was rising under the surface. But the lake was dark, almost mirror-like. Nothing moved below. The ripple expanded until it faded into the rest of the water. Then another one formed in the exact same spot. This one was slower, more deliberate. The center trembled just a tiny bit, like the surface was vibrating. That's when the light appeared. It showed up above the lake, maybe 100 feet in the air, barely brighter than a dying ember. A dim red glow, round but not sharply outlined. It pulsed soft, slow beats, the way a distant radio tower sometimes looks through fog, except there wasn't any fog and there weren't any towers anywhere near Lake Brenton. I froze with one foot in the damp sand. The red light brightened slightly, then dimmed again. Each pulse lined up almost perfectly with the ring forming in the water. Light, ripple, light, ripple, like they were connected. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see headlights from a new arrival, or maybe a drone operator messing around. But the dirt lot was empty, except for my car, and the trees on either side stood thick and dark. I tried to listen for a hum. Drones have that high whine, but the only things I heard were the insects and a single bullfrog croaking somewhere farther down the shoreline. Another ripple formed, larger this time. The red light drifted slightly, maybe 5 or 6 feet to the right. Not fast, just a slow lateral slide. But the movement was too smooth to be a plane or helicopter, and it didn't have the green and white marker lights required for aircraft. I pulled my phone out and tried to record video, but the camera could barely pick up the glow. It looked like a faint red blur on the screen. The water didn't show up at all. While I fiddled with the phone, the sound around me changed. The insects didn't stop entirely. It wasn't that dramatic, but the noise flattened out, like they'd all backed off to a distance. Even the bullfrog sounded farther away than it had a minute earlier. Then the air pressure shifted, not enough to hurt, just enough that my ears felt too open, like the world got vacuumed out for half a second. The red light pulsed brighter once, and the ripple below it spread outward again, but this time the center did dip. Not much, maybe an inch or two, like something pressed down from above but didn't touch the surface. I stepped back, bumping into my folding chair. I wasn't scared yet, exactly, but I felt a kind of tightness in my chest I didn't have a name for. I aimed my flashlight at the water, thinking maybe the beam would reveal whatever was under there, but the moment the light hit the lake, the red glow flickered. Just a little. A stutter. The ripple froze mid-expansion. I lowered the flashlight and the ripple finished expanding normally. I tried it again. Light on, flicker. Ripple pause. Light off, pulse and ripple synced again. It was reacting to the beam. I felt stupid standing there doing experiments, but it gave me something to focus on besides the crawling feeling in my spine. The red light drifted closer to shore, maybe 10 feet, then another 10. It didn't tilt or wobble the way a drone would. It moved like it was suspended on a rail the rest of us couldn't see. When it got maybe 20 feet out from the shoreline, the water reacted before the light pulsed. The lake surface tightened, like a sheet being pulled taut, then released. That's when I finally got scared. I started packing up fast, grabbed my chair, my bottle, shoved everything under one arm. I kept my eyes on the glow and walked backward toward the trees. The light pulsed harder now, brighter. Still not enough to light up the lake or the trees. It seemed self-contained, but strong enough that it left a faint blot in my vision. The ripples kept coming in perfect circles, larger now. Too large to make sense, stretching almost all the way to the reeds. I reached the edge of the parking area and nearly tripped over a root. For a moment, the trees blocked part of my view, but I could still see the redness through gaps in the branches. Then the glow stopped pulsing. It held steady. The lake surface stopped moving. Completely. Not even the smallest lap of water touched the shore. The air got heavy again, that same pressure shift, like a thick blanket settling over everything. I heard something, not from the sky, but from the ground, a kind of low, buzzing throb under my feet. Not electricity, more like a distant engine running under the earth. I looked back toward the water. The red light began to rise, slow, steady, straight up. The ripples didn't return. Nothing disturbed the lake now. It was glossy and dark like oil. I watched the light climb until it was maybe 200 feet above the water. Then it dimmed a little, held position, and slid sideways across the sky with this soft sideways drift. No acceleration, no tilt, no arc. Just a perfect horizontal glide. I followed it with my eyes until it reached the part of the sky where the treetops meet the horizon. It pulsed once more, faint, barely visible. Then it winked out, not faded, not flew off, just gone. The lake stayed mirror still for almost a full minute before a breeze finally broke the surface, and everything around me snapped back into normal sound. Insects, the frog, distant traffic from the far shore. It was like somebody unmuted the world. I stood there clutching my chair until my hands hurt. Eventually I forced myself to walk to the car. My legs felt unsteady on the gravel, like I'd run a mile without stretching. Driving home, every time I passed an opening in the trees, I checked the sky for any hint of red. Nothing showed. When I got back to my apartment, I set the chair in the corner and noticed it was shaking a little because my hands were still trembling. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing, replaying the ripples, those perfect circles in my head. I went back to Lake Brenton the next afternoon after work, just to prove to myself it would look normal. It did. Kids were swimming, someone was grilling. Water lapped against the shore like regular water. Standing there in daylight, I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Almost. Then I walked to the exact spot I'd been sitting the night before and saw a faint mark on the shore, a curved line in the sand, almost like someone had drawn the edge of a circle with a stick, then half erased it. The lake moved normally around it. Wind, chop, nothing strange. But the line stayed there, untouched by the waves. I didn't sit down. I didn't unpack anything. I just backed away from the water and didn't return until weeks later, when the memory finally loosened its grip enough that the lake felt like a lake again. Even now, sometimes when I'm near still water, I catch myself watching for a perfect circle forming where nothing should be, and for that dim red glow waiting above it, pulsing like a quiet signal I don't want to understand. I noticed the lights starting to act strange halfway down Alder Street, right after I passed the little corner market that always smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. It was around 10:45 p.m. early fall, one of those nights where the air feels cool but not cold, and everything has that damp, quiet heaviness. I'd stayed late at my friend Matt's place helping him move furniture around his apartment, and I didn't feel like waiting 40 minutes for the bus, so I decided to walk the 20 minutes back to my place. Alder was usually well lit, old metal street lamps every 30 yards or so, buzzing faintly, the kind of orange glow that made everything look slightly washed out. That night, though, the far end of the block looked dimmer than usual. I thought maybe a bulb was out. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it wasn't one bulb. It was all of them, going dark one by one. The lamp closest to me was on. The next one flickered, then went black. 2 seconds later, the next one flickered. Then, black. Like dominoes. I slowed down. There was no power outage. The houses on either side of the street still had porch lights on, TVs flickering behind curtains. Just the street lamps were shutting off, and they were doing it in a perfect sequence down the block. I stopped walking entirely when the fifth light blinked out. The darkness was creeping toward me like a curtain being pulled shut. I waited for the lamps behind me, the ones closer to the market, to go out too, but they stayed steady, buzzing normally. Only the ones ahead were failing. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue, something underground. A breaker tripping. The stupid explanations your brain reaches for, even when they don't fit what you're seeing. The sixth lamp flickered hard enough that the bulb inside rattled, then died. There were 2 more between me and the big intersection at Cedar Avenue. I could still see some light from the intersection spill into the dark stretch, but it wasn't enough to make me feel better. I checked my phone out of habit. No bars, not unusual for that area, but it made me feel more alone than I should have. I debated turning around and going back to Matt's instead of continuing, but the idea of walking back past all the houses with dark front yards somehow felt worse. At least the intersection ahead had traffic lights and usually a few cars passing. The 7th lamp died. I took a slow step backward. My heel scraped the pavement louder than it should have. I kept staring into the dark ahead, expecting to see someone. Maybe a city worker in a bucket truck or kids messing with the breaker box. But there was nobody. Just the empty street. The 8th lamp, the one closest to me, flickered wildly, like the bulb was being shaken inside the casing, then blinked out. That left me standing right at the edge of a long, perfect stretch of darkness. The whole block ahead was black now. Not dim, black, like the light from the intersection couldn't penetrate it fully. My eyes should have adjusted, but they didn't. The dark felt thick. That's when I heard the faint shimmer. Shimmer isn't the right word, but I can't think of a better one. It wasn't a hum or a buzz or a whistle. It was like tiny pieces of glass brushing together, soft, high-pitched, almost delicate. And it came from above me. I tilted my head back slowly. There was nothing in the sky, no plane, no drone, no bird, just a faint blur passing across the stars, as if someone dragged translucent cloth overhead. It didn't block the stars exactly. It warped them, bent them slightly, like heat haze at night, but colder somehow. The shimmer passed directly over me, and all 8 streetlights flickered back to life at the same moment. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The lamps buzzed harder than usual, like they were waking up from sleep. For a few seconds, the entire block looked too bright, as if the bulbs were running beyond their normal power. The shimmering sound faded as whatever that was moved farther down the road. The blur above me drifted towards Cedar Avenue, distorting the sky as it went. When it reached the intersection, the traffic lights turned yellow. Not blinking, solid yellow. All 4 directions. Cars slowed awkwardly, unsure what to do. I watched one driver roll down his window like he was about to shout at someone. The blur hovered briefly above the crossing, or maybe it just moved slower there, and then continued east toward the river. As soon as it left the intersection, the traffic lights snapped back to normal red-green patterns. The street lamps behind it flickered again, but stayed on this time. I stood frozen for a while, unsure whether to keep walking or just go back to Matt's and make up some excuse to crash on his couch. Eventually, I forced myself forward, partly because standing alone under those lights felt worse than walking. I kept glancing up, even though the blur was gone from sight. Every time I passed under a lamp, I listened for the shimmer, but the only things I heard were distant cars and the rustle of leaves. When I reached the intersection, a man in a red hoodie was standing on the corner smoking. He kept looking up too, the same way I probably had been. When I passed, he said, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger. I crossed Cedar and continued toward my apartment. The closer I got to home, the more normal everything seemed. Dogs barking behind fences, a porch light flickering because someone hadn't replaced the bulb, the distant sound of a train. But every time I stepped under a street lamp, I waited for it to die. 3 blocks from home, the streetlights stayed steady, but the air changed again. The temperature dropped fast, like stepping into an air-conditioned room. I rubbed my arms, confused. I could see my breath for maybe 3 seconds before the air warmed back up, as if whatever passed overhead had left a cold trail hanging behind. I didn't hear the shimmer again, but the sudden cold felt like the same thing, just quieter. When I finally reached my building, I practically jogged up the stairs. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt too normal. My kitchen light humming its usual hum, the clock on the stove blinking 10:56 like nothing had happened. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing strange happened. No darkened lamps, no shimmering sky, no warped stars. Around midnight, I heard something faint outside. Not the shimmer, just a soft click as the streetlight in front of my building turned off for its scheduled cycle. It startled me anyway. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked the exact same route to see if anything looked weird in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. The lamps intact, the intersection normal, the air a mild fall temperature. But halfway down Alder, where the last lamp had gone dark the night before, I found a patch of asphalt that looked polished. That's the only word I could think of. Not wet, not scraped. Polished. A smooth circle about 2 feet wide, like something had hovered just above it long enough to burnish the pavement. No one else seemed to notice it. Some days I walk through that block without thinking about it. Other days, especially when the air gets oddly still or when the lamps buzz a little louder than usual, I catch myself looking up, waiting for the sky to bend again, waiting for that faint shimmer to announce something drifting just overhead, invisible except for the way it snuffs out the light as it passes. The fog was already thick when I turned onto Bayless Street, so dense it looked like it was pressing down on the rooftops instead of drifting. I'd been out later than I meant to. Dinner with a coworker ran long, and by the time I started walking home, the streetlights were just hazy orange smudges, barely lighting more than a few feet ahead. I don't usually walk that route. It's quieter, almost too quiet at night, with long lines of old bungalows and narrow yards. That night it felt even more closed in, like the fog was swallowing up sound as well as light. My footsteps felt muffled. Even the distant traffic on the main road sounded far away. I was halfway down the block when I saw the lights. At first it looked like a faint glow above one of the houses. Not a beam, not a spotlight, just a soft cluster of points barely visible through the fog. My brain tried to fit it into something normal. Christmas lights? Security floodlights? A drone? But the lights weren't stationary, they were moving. Not flying, exactly, more like drifting. A group of maybe 6 or 7 small, pale points gliding together in this slow, coordinated rhythm just above the roofline across the street. It reminded me of fish swimming in formation, changing direction with subtle shifts I didn't fully see. They weren't bright enough to cast light on anything, not even the fog around them. They were just there, suspended in that heavy gray air. I stopped walking without realizing it. The lights slid left, then curved upward slightly. They dipped again, sliding behind a tree's silhouette, then reappeared on the other side. I blinked hard, thinking I was seeing reflections from cars or street lamps, but there were no cars, and the nearest working lamp was behind me, barely hanging on through the fog. The cluster drifted closer, not toward me, but toward the center of the street, like it was inspecting the row of houses. The movement was too smooth for anything mechanical. No stutter, no wobble, no flicker, just controlled, silent motion. The hairs on my neck lifted. I took one small step backward. The lights paused. They didn't grow brighter, didn't act like they noticed me. But the pause itself felt wrong, like something had nudged a gear out of alignment. Then they shifted formation. The points drew closer together, almost touching, then spread out again in a pattern that didn't feel random. Not a shape I recognized, just something deliberate, coordinated. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. My voice sounded like it got swallowed by the fog the second it left my mouth. The lights began drifting in my direction, slowly. Not like they were honing in on me, but like they'd simply chosen a path that happened to lead down the street I was standing in. But with the fog low and the houses dark, there was nowhere I could go without crossing directly into their path. I stepped behind a parked sedan, crouching slightly. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my jaw. I peeked over the roof of the car. The lights floated to the center of the street and hovered there, not fully stopping. Tiny adjustments kept happening, little slides and dips, but holding a general position. One of the lights drifted lower than the others, as if scanning the fog beneath it. Then it rose again and rejoined the group. The cluster tilted, changing orientation in a way that didn't match gravity or perspective. It wasn't rotating like an object. It was more like the entire formation had reframed itself in space, each point maintaining its relation to the others, while the whole thing angled smoothly. My breath turned shallow. I realized I was squeezing the edge of the car door so hard my knuckles hurt. A new sound entered the air. Not a hum, not a buzzing, but a faint pressure shift feeling in my ears, like when you drive through a long tunnel. It wasn't loud, but it felt physical, like the air density changed for a moment. The lights slowly rose higher, as if preparing to go above the fog layer. I watched, barely blinking. Then the fog thinned, just a small breath of wind, a slight parting, and for a second I saw the sky clearly above the cluster. Nothing was there. Not the lights, not a silhouette, not a craft, just empty air. The fog closed again almost immediately, and the lights reappeared. But farther down the street, as if the brief clarity had reset their position. They drifted quietly over the next block, moving with that same synchronized glide, then softened into the fog until I couldn't tell if they'd vanished or simply gotten too far away to see. The air pressure eased in my ears. The night noise returned faintly. A dog barked a few streets over. I stayed behind the parked car for at least another minute, waiting for any sign they might return. Nothing did. Slowly, I stood up and rubbed my hands together to get feeling back. Every house on the block looked normal, dim, quiet, fog-blurred. My own breath felt too loud. I walked the rest of the way home fast, checking behind me every few steps. The fog swallowed everything. I didn't see any more lights. Inside my apartment, I locked the door twice and stood at the window staring out at the street. Fog pressed against the glass, street lamp halos wobbling softly in it. Nothing unusual. But when the fog shifted, I kept expecting to see a cluster of pale points sliding through it, drifting low over the rooftops, moving with that too smooth rhythm. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, the fog was gone. The air was bright and ordinary. But later that afternoon, when I walked past the same block to prove to myself it had been nothing special, the quiet felt different. Like the street remembered something, even if I tried not to. Every now and then, when the weather turns damp and the fog creeps low, I catch myself watching the tops of houses for any sign of light moving in ways light shouldn't, always waiting to see if a cluster will drift into view again, synchronized like something alive behind the gray. I was training for a half marathon that September, which meant a lot of late runs after work. I lived in Tallahassee at the time, renting a duplex near Lake Jackson. The lake trails were usually pretty empty after dark, especially past the first mile. That didn't usually bother me. I liked the quiet, the steady rhythm of running without traffic. That night, I headed out around 9:15. It had been raining most of the afternoon, and the trail was still damp. You could smell wet leaves and mud. The air was warm but not muggy. One of those evenings where the temperature drops just enough to make everything feel still. I started from the parking area near the boat ramp and took the usual loop east along the wooded section. About 10 minutes in, I saw a light ahead of me. It wasn't a flashlight, it wasn't bright enough or shaped right. It was this soft, pale glow floating maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground, right in the middle of the trail. It reminded me of the way a bike reflector looks when headlights hit it, except nothing was shining on it. It was just there. At first, I figured it was a runner with some weird reflective vest, or maybe somebody wearing one of those tiny clip-on LEDs, but the light wasn't moving. It just hovered. I slowed down and took out one earbud. The woods were quiet. No bugs, no rustling leaves, nothing. That was strange because the rain usually brought out a ton of insects. I jogged a little closer, maybe 20 feet away, and the light moved. Not fast, just this slow, smooth glide backward down the trail, like it was keeping the same distance from me. I thought maybe it was a drone, but there was no sound. No buzzing, no whirring, just silence, deep silence. I walked for a minute, not sure what I was looking at. The light stayed ahead of me like it was waiting. Whenever I stepped forward, it drifted farther down the path. Whenever I stopped, it held still. I wasn't scared yet, just confused and honestly kind of annoyed. I kept thinking it had to be someone messing with a toy or testing something out. But there weren't any footprints in the mud ahead of me, and the trail was narrow. Anyone running or biking would have left marks. I called out, "Hey, is someone there?" But my voice sounded weird in the quiet, like it didn't go very far. The light didn't react. I tried jogging again, picking up the pace. The light stayed the same distance ahead, gliding smooth as a cable cam. No sway, no bounce. It felt wrong, the way it moved, too steady, too straight. Around the next bend, the trees got thicker, and the trail dipped slightly with a wooden footbridge over a runoff creek. The light moved onto the bridge and stopped right in the middle of it. I slowed down again. The air felt heavier there, like the humidity suddenly doubled. I could feel sweat cooling on my arms even though I hadn't run hard enough to justify it. I walked onto the bridge carefully. The boards creaked normally under my shoes. The light was about 10 feet in front of me. As I got closer, maybe 8 feet away, the glow dimmed in this weird, pulsing way. Not like fading out, more like something passing in front of it. I couldn't see a shape, though, just that the light flickered, then steadied again. I remember thinking how quiet the creek was. Usually even a tiny trickle of water made noise under that bridge, but I couldn't hear anything. No frogs, no wind, no distant road sounds. Nothing at all. I stepped forward one more time. The light blinked out, not faded, vanished, like somebody turned off a switch. The darkness hit hard. My eyes hadn't adjusted because I'd been staring at that glow, so the trail went pitch black. I stood there, breathing too fast, waiting for my vision to come back. Even the air felt different, lighter, emptier. Then the forest sounds returned all at once. Crickets, distant tree frogs, a night bird calling, everything layered together like someone had unmuted the world. I didn't move for a minute. I just stood on the bridge and listened. The bugs were almost too loud after all that silence. Eventually, I jogged the rest of the loop, but way slower than usual. I kept checking behind me even though I didn't see anything else strange. The woods looked normal. The trail looked normal. If I hadn't seen the mud on my shoes later, I would have wondered if I had even been out there at all. When I got back to the parking lot, I realized the run tracking app on my phone had stopped at 9:32. The screen wasn't frozen. It just showed a perfectly clean end to the route, as if I had tapped finish myself. That was around the time I'd first noticed the hovering light. It didn't record the rest of the run. I tried replaying it, but the app said the run was complete. The GPS graph looked fine up until the moment the light showed up. Then nothing. On the drive home, I kept checking the woods on either side of the road. The trees looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me on the trail, not watching exactly, but aware. I told my friend Marcus about it the next day. He runs that trail sometimes too. He laughed it off and said I'd probably seen someone's drone. Maybe he was right, but I know what drones sound like, and I know they don't move like that. I didn't run the lake loop again for a week. When I finally went back, the trail felt totally different. Brighter, noisier, alive. There was nothing weird at all. Still, every time I reached that wooden bridge, I slowed down without meaning to. I listened for the silence. I watched for that pale glow hovering just ahead of me. It hasn't happened again, but I keep expecting it to. I noticed it while letting my dog out behind the duplex. It was late, close to midnight, and the sky was clear enough that you could see every star. This was in Ridge Park, Colorado, where light pollution is low enough that the sky actually looks like a sky and not a faded ceiling. I wasn't even really paying attention at first. I was standing in the cold waiting for Hazel to sniff the same patch of grass she sniffed every night. Then I looked up, and there it was. A blurry spot in the sky. At first, I thought it was my eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed them a little, but the blur didn't change. Everything else, stars, the line of the roof, the silhouette of the mountains, was sharp. But one small patch, about the size of my fist held up at arm's length, looked out of focus, like someone had smudged a lens. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before it moved. Not fast. It drifted. Slow enough that I questioned whether it was drifting at all, like maybe my depth perception was off. But no, after a few seconds, it was obviously shifting across the stars. the way a cloud might move if it was way up in the stratosphere and incredibly thin. Except there were no clouds. The air was freezing and totally clear. Hazel growled once, a low, uncertain sound. She doesn't growl at the sky. At raccoons, sure. At the neighbor's cat, definitely. But not at empty air. She backed up toward the door. I kept watching the blur. My brain kept trying to interpret it as something normal, maybe a patch of wind distortion, maybe a tiny cloud I just couldn't see the edges of, but didn't behave like anything I'd seen. It didn't expand or thin out. It didn't shift shape. It just drifted, maintaining this weird fuzzy oval like an out-of-focus asteroid was passing overhead. When it reached a thin strip of cloud near the horizon, I swear this happened, it disappeared behind it, like it had depth, like it was actually above the cloud. I waited for it to come out the other side. It didn't. Hazel scratched at the back door, clearly done with whatever was happening. I opened it for her, stepped inside, and immediately felt stupid for how fast I locked it. But something about that blur had wedged under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a trick of the eyes. I tried to go to bed, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked sitting in a dark room with the blinds open, so I closed them. Then I opened them again. I didn't want to feel like I was hiding from something. Eventually, I just lay there with my phone on my chest, scrolling nothing. Around 1:20 a.m., I heard a soft popping sound, like static from a radio just before it tunes in. It wasn't in the house. It came from outside, maybe down the street. Hazel lifted her head from where she was curled at the foot of the bed. Her ears went straight up. Another pop, slightly louder. Then silence. I got up and looked out the blinds. The street was empty, just the orange glow of the sodium lamp at the corner, the shadow of the neighbor's pickup, the fence line. No movement, no people, nothing. I almost closed the blinds again when I saw something shift near the far end of the street. Not a person, not an animal, just a faint distortion in the air, like heat rising off asphalt. Except it was below freezing, and this heat ripple was moving horizontally across the road. The air behind it shimmered slightly, like looking through warped glass. It drifted past the street lamp, and for an instant the light above it flickered. Not a normal flicker either. It dimmed smoothly, almost like a dimmer switch being turned down. Then the distortion passed, and the lamp returned to normal. I held perfectly still, fingers tight on the blinds. The distortion kept moving, slow and steady, until it faded into the darkness near the cul-de-sac. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I went outside early just to prove to myself the world was normal again. The sky was clear blue, no blur, no distortion. Hazel trotted around the yard like she'd forgotten everything. But as I was heading back inside, I noticed the fence. 5 of the boards near the far side had a faint powdery residue on them, like someone rubbed chalk across the wood. When I touched it, it felt cold. Too cold for sunlight to have warmed the board, but colder than the rest of the fence. My fingers tingled numbly for a moment after brushing it. I told myself it was frost, even though it didn't look like frost. That evening, I drove to the grocery store, partly because I needed things, mostly because I didn't want to sit alone in the house again. The store was bright, noisy, normal. I lingered in aisles I didn't need anything from. On the drive home, just after I turned onto Ridge Park Road, the radio cut out for half a second. Not off, not static, just silence. And then came back. I frowned and tapped the console. The same thing happened again a few seconds later. Then I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shimmer. A small patch of air behind my car, slightly warped like a reflection off water. It hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground and drifted across the tops of the trees lining the road. Compared to the trees, I could tell it was actually moving, keeping pace with me for a few seconds before veering off. My stomach dropped. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and turned around in my seat. The shimmering patch slid between branches, then rose upward, higher and higher until it merged with the sky. Gone. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just some weird light trick, maybe headlights from another car hitting ice crystals in the air. Except there were no other cars, and no ice crystals, and the radio cutting out right before hadn't felt like coincidence. Back home, I didn't turn on any lights for a while. I kept the living room dim and sat on the couch with Hazel's head on my knee. Every few minutes I'd glance at the window half expecting to see that blurry patch floating there. Nothing happened for hours. Then, just after midnight, Hazel stood up abruptly and walked to the back door. Not whining, not scratching, just staring at it with her tail stiff. I joined her, but I didn't open it. Through the glass, I couldn't see anything. The yard was silent, but the air outside felt still, too still, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Then one star above the yard flickered. Not twinkled, flickered, like a candle flame. Once, twice. Then the star dimmed slightly and stayed dim as if something had moved in front of it. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. Slowly, that dim section of sky, just a tiny dark patch, shifted to the left. A smooth, steady motion. It passed between two brighter stars and then faded, blending back into the night like it had never been separate from it. Hazel backed away from the door. I locked it again, even though I knew that wouldn't mean anything to something that could pass through the sky like that. I didn't sleep that night either. When dawn came, the world looked normal again. Cars starting, neighbors walking their dogs, distant traffic hum. But it didn't feel normal. I still look up every night, checking the sky the way you check a bruise to see if it's still tender. Most nights, there's nothing. But a few nights ago, a patch of stars near the tree line dimmed all at once, like someone touched the sky and smudged it. And for a moment I thought I saw something drifting just behind that smudge, as if the sky itself was hiding whatever was moving through it. The first time I noticed the light was when I crested the hill just past the old quarry road. I drove that route at least 4 times a week, out on County Route G toward the edge of the foothills, where the road twisted through dry grass and low scrub before cutting back toward town. It was early evening, hot dusk, the kind where the sun dipped low, but the heat still lingered in the asphalt. My truck's windows were down, warm air pushing in, smelling faintly of dust and pine. When I reached the top of the hill, the horizon opened up, and that's when I saw it. A bright point of light hovering just above the next distant ridgeline. Not high, not low, just there, clear against the dimming orange sky. At first I thought it was a tower light or something reflecting, but as I started driving down the slope, it didn't shift the way distant lights usually do. It moved with me. My name's Rebecca Ibarra. I lived in a small place outside San Ornelas and worked evenings cleaning offices in the downtown block. That drive was so routine I could do it with my eyes half closed. Except that night I kept staring at that light. It didn't blink, it didn't flicker. Just a steady bright glow, maybe the size of a distant star, but too low and too defined to be one. As I leveled out and climbed the next ridge, I fully expected it to fall behind or grow closer. It did neither. When I reached the next crest, there it was again, sitting over the next stretch of land like it had always been meant to be there. I glanced in my mirrors, no car behind me with high beams. I looked left and right, trying to find some structure or tower, but there was nothing but rolling terrain and the thin line of trees near the creek. Okay, I whispered to myself, more out of confusion than fear. I kept driving. Another mile, another slow incline, same thing. The light matched my pace perfectly. Not ahead, not behind, just off in the distance, steady as if pinned to the same point in the sky. A strange pressure settled behind my eyes, like the kind you get before a storm. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, even though I hadn't meant to. I told myself it was just some environmental illusion, something caused by haze or leftover heat. Still, a part of me felt watched. The road dipped down into a shallow valley. The light sank with it, disappearing briefly behind the ridge. My heart skipped just a bit. Relief washed in for a second. Then, as I climbed the next rise, it reappeared. Exactly the same position, same brightness, same distance. I swallowed hard. The sun finally dropped below the horizon, leaving the sky pale violet streaked with gray. The air cooled slightly, but a heavy stillness followed. My truck radio crackled, so I twisted the knob off. I didn't want noise. It felt wrong somehow. The light stayed silent. No hum, no rumble, no sign of movement other than the careful way it refused to change position. It was like driving next to something that didn't exist. At one point, I slowed down on purpose. The light slowed too. When I sped up, it glided forward enough to keep the same distance, still hovering above the ridge like it was calmly observing. I pulled over briefly near the old mailbox that marked the broken fence line. The engine idled. Crickets chirped faintly somewhere in the grass. The light hung there unmoving. I stepped out of the truck and stood on the roadside, boots crunching on gravel, eyes trained on it. The sky dimmed further, and the single glow appeared stronger now against the darker shade of approaching night. "Hello?" I called into the open air, feeling ridiculous the moment the word left my mouth. No response. No change. Just that stubborn light. I stood there longer than I meant to, arms crossed loosely, quiet, settling around my skin. It didn't feel aggressive, didn't feel kind either. Just present, like it was marking me on a map only it could see. Finally, I climbed back into the truck and started driving again. The light kept pace. Over the next 10 minutes, it crept just a fraction higher in the sky. Not enough to notice at first, but enough that I had to angle my eyes slightly upward to see it. The road twisted through a narrow cut in the foothills, darkening as shadows from the ridges crept across the pavement. My headlights swept side to side as I followed the curve. The light never wavered. At one point, a thin fog drifted across the next ridge, pale and low. The glow slipped behind it, briefly diffused, creating a soft halo. Then it reemerged, unchanged. The pressure in the air thickened again, like the atmosphere itself felt heavier the longer I drove beneath that thing. My phone's screen lit up briefly on the seat beside me. I glanced down to see if someone was calling. No signal. I tried unlocking it again, same thing. That road never lost service. Not for me. When I looked up, the light had drifted slightly to the right, still keeping pace, but now moving closer to the line of trees that marked the edge of the valley. The silence inside the truck grew suffocating. Even the normal sounds of driving felt muted, as if the world beyond the windows had slipped into a softer version of reality. "Just keep going," I murmured, more as a grounding effort than anything else. The town lights finally became visible in the far distance, a scatter of yellow points that marked the edge of home. As I approached the outskirts, the light hesitated for the first time. It dimmed slightly, then slid sideways at a gentle angle. It didn't rush off, didn't shoot away, just slowly drifted, almost like it had decided it was done pacing me. I rolled into a small turnout just outside town and pulled over again. The glow continued its slow trajectory, moving toward the darker stretch of sky behind the hills. Within moments, it faded into nothing, leaving only empty clouds and the grainy texture of night settling overhead. My heart pounded harder than I realized. I sat there for several minutes, listening to the normal sounds return. A distant truck, wind brushing the tall grass, the occasional chirp of insects. Nothing followed me after that. I drove home on autopilot, shoulders tight the whole way, glancing up at every ridge as if expecting the light to appear again. But the sky stayed quiet. Even so, every time I drove that route afterward, part of me searched the horizon. And when the road crested just right, when the angle hit perfectly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen still understood my pace better than I ever could. The light had just turned red at the corner of Vesper and Langley, and I was sitting there waiting, half listening to the radio and half watching the sky through my windshield. It was close to midnight, late enough that the city had thinned out, but not empty. I'd just left my cousin Bryce's place after helping him move a couch that barely fit through his stairwell, and my shoulders still felt sore and stiff. The air outside was warm for October, dry and heavy, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to cool off or hold on to summer. My name's Kieran Solis. I lived on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood where porch lights stayed on all night and most people pretended they didn't know each other. I leaned back in the driver's seat, drumming my fingers against the steering wheel, watching the moon hang low and yellow over the buildings. It looked full, bright enough to cast faint silver lines over the tops of parked cars. Then it started to dim, not like a cloud sliding over it. It just muted slowly, like someone turning down a dial. The edges stayed sharp, no haze, no color change around it, just less light. I squinted and leaned forward slightly. That's when the shadow crossed it. A dark shape moved cleanly across the surface of the moon, smooth and deliberate, not trailing, not jittery, just one long, quiet glide from left to right. Too steady to be a bird, too close to the surface to be a plane, and way too clean to be a cloud. The radio cut to static for a split second, and then returned. I didn't even notice the light had changed green until the car behind me honked. I flinched, put my foot on the gas, and rolled forward through the intersection, but my eyes kept drifting back toward the sky through the side window. The moon was normal again. Bright. Clear. As if nothing touched it. No way, I muttered. I slowed on purpose, letting the next car pass around me as I craned my neck upward. Nothing. The rest of the drive felt wrong. Not dramatic wrong. Just that uncomfortable awareness, like someone was standing behind you even when there wasn't. I kept checking my rearview mirror and the sky through my sunroof, expecting to see that same shadow sweep over the moon again. It didn't. By the time I pulled onto my street, my pulse had sped up without me realizing it. I parked and sat there a moment, engine idling, staring through the windshield at my quiet little block. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I turned the car off and stepped out, the night air cool against my arms. A dog barked somewhere down the road. A porch light flickered. The distant hum of traffic bled in from the main avenue. I glanced up again, squinting between rooftops. The moon shone steady and round, no trace of interference. Inside my apartment, the air felt stale, like it needed to circulate. I opened the kitchen window slightly and poured myself a glass of water, trying to shake off the weird tightness sitting high in my chest. Told myself it was probably just a passing plane or a trick of perspective. Still, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. The way the shadow moved, the way the moon dimmed first. Like it knew something was about to pass in front of it. I sat on the couch and flipped on the TV mostly for background noise. Some late-night infomercial rambled on, but I barely processed a word. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Then the street went quiet again in that way cities only do when something's off in the rhythm. No passing cars, no music from open windows. Even the distant highway noise seemed fainter, muffled. I stood and walked over to my own window, parting the curtain just a little. The moon hung slightly higher now, glowing pale and calm. A moment later, it dimmed again. Not as much as before, but enough that my breath caught, and then the shadow returned. This time it moved slower, broader, like it stretched further across the surface, covering almost a third of the moon before gliding past and thinning into nothing. The air outside felt strangely still. The trees along the sidewalk didn't move at all, even though they'd been swaying earlier. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass. There was no engine sound, no aircraft hum, no rustle of wings, just silence and that dark shape sliding across something that shouldn't be touched by anything that close. It disappeared as smoothly as it came. The moon brightened immediately. My phone vibrated in my hand where I didn't remember picking it up. The screen read 12:41 a.m. It had been 12:19 when I left my cousin's place. I didn't remember the earlier part of the drive taking that long. I stepped away from the window and walked into the hallway, heartbeat loud and slow like it was pacing itself. The overhead light buzzed faintly, then settled. Once more, everything quieted. The type of silence that didn't feel natural. Like the whole neighborhood paused without knowing why. Then I heard something outside, a soft scraping sound along the pavement, slow, dragging, unhurried. I leaned forward and peeked through the blinds again. No one was there. The street remained empty, wet-looking asphalt catching pale reflection from street lamps. No stray cats, no people, no cars creeping by. Above, the moon stayed calm and ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had crossed it hadn't gone far, like it had just slipped somewhere I couldn't see anymore. After a while, the silence broke. A car passed. Someone laughed down the block. The city resumed breathing like nothing had paused at all. I shut the blinds and tried to distract myself, but every faint shadow inside my apartment felt a little heavier. Every small noise felt like it had weight behind it. When I finally lay in bed, my eyes kept drifting back to the window. I didn't pull the curtains shut. A little after 1, the moonlight slipped across my floor again, pale and steady. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the light dimmed just slightly, and a faint line slid across it, barely visible this time, like the shallowest trace of movement against something far too distant. I lay there still, watching, breathing slow, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy. The moon returned to its normal glow. The air stayed calm. The night carried on, but the quiet felt different after that, like it had learned how to watch back. Condensation formed a perfect ring on my windshield while I was sitting in the grocery store parking lot, engine off, windows cracked just enough to let the late summer air drift in. It was still warm out, no sudden chill, no foggy breath, just this smooth, clear circle of moisture like someone had pressed a cold metal hoop against the glass. It caught my eye because it didn't look natural. Not streaked, not patchy, just a ring. My name was Darren Kovach, and I'd pulled over in the far corner of the lot to answer a call from my cousin Mateo. The sun was low and washed everything in dull orange light, the kind that made the asphalt look soft and dusty. There were a few cars going in and out, nothing strange about the place, except that ring. I rubbed at it with my sleeve. It didn't smear. It just faded and then crept back into shape, like the glass remembered it. I checked my dashboard temperature out of instinct. 78 degrees. Normal, same as when I'd parked. Mateo was still talking on the phone, rambling about his new job and some forklift accident at work. I half listened, eyes stuck on the windshield, watching the ring slowly sharpen again. No mist anywhere else, just that circle, centered slightly to the right of where my gaze would normally rest while driving. "You okay?" Mateo asked. "Yeah, just distracted," I said. "Weird windshield thing." He laughed and kept talking, but my stomach had tightened in that quiet way it does when something feels off, but you don't know why yet. Another car rolled past behind me, a pale blue Prius, sunlight reflecting cleanly off its side windows. No fog, no rings, just normal glass. My phone crackled and Mateo's voice cut out. The screen flashed, "Call failed." I looked up to reconnect and noticed the ring on the windshield had deepened, thicker now, with tiny lines branching inward like frost patterns, but without the cold. The air inside my car still felt warm and dry. I rolled my window down more, letting the outside heat rush in, just to see if anything shifted. Nothing changed. The ring stayed. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading toward Route 6 like I'd planned. As the car moved, the ring moved with the glass, staying perfectly centered, almost like it wanted to be in front of me. No other cars had anything like it. At the stoplight, I leaned forward to study it closer. It had a slight shimmer, like condensation about to evaporate, but it never did. Around it, the rest of the windshield stayed perfectly clear. The light turned green. I drove on. It felt stupid to be unsettled by something as simple as fog, but this didn't behave like fog. It looked deliberate, measured, meant. Heading out of town, houses thinned into low fields and distant tree lines. The sky turned from orange to soft gray as the sun dipped lower. A faint layer of clouds rolled in from the west, nothing threatening, just heavy enough to dull the horizon. The ring pulsed once, barely noticeable, a subtle darkening and lightening. I blinked, convinced my eyes were tired. It stayed the same. A few miles down the highway, my phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. "Call me back." I tapped the screen, but the signal bars dropped to 0. No service. That didn't make sense. This stretch of road always had coverage. I crested a slight hill and glanced ahead, half expecting something to cause all this. The road stretched empty, quiet, just me and fields on either side. Then I noticed another patch of condensation forming, faintly near the far edge of the windshield. Not a full circle, just a soft arc like the edge of another ring that never fully appeared. A low, distant hum drifted into the car. It wasn't coming from the engine or the road beneath me. It felt like pressure, more than sound, vibrating faintly through the steering wheel. I checked my mirrors. No cars behind me, no trucks. Just open road and fading light. The original ring thickened again, clearer now, and I realized it wasn't quite round. It was too precise, too smooth. My breathing felt shallow without me trying. The hum grew slightly stronger. Not loud, just present. I pulled over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, tires crunching softly as I stopped. The car idled, the hum didn't change. The ring sat there, calm, as if waiting. I opened the door and stepped out. The evening air hit me full force, warm and still. No breeze, no insects, just quiet. Standing beside the car, I expected the condensation to whiten or vanish, but it looked the same from the outside. A faint, perfect halo on the glass. Still no sign of fog anywhere else. I took a few hesitant steps around the front bumper, scanning the windshield from different angles. Sunlight barely kissed the horizon behind me, throwing long shadows across the field. And then I noticed something odd. The ring didn't reflect the sky the same way the rest of the glass did. Through that circle, the sky looked slightly darker, like it filtered light instead of reflecting it. The hum deepened, subtle, slow, like the low note of something massive moving far away. I checked the field ahead, searching for any source. Nothing moved. No power lines nearby, no towers. The condensation around the ring began to creep outward just a little, thin veins forming like frost about to spread. But the temperature hadn't changed. My breath didn't show. My arms didn't feel cold. I stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable being so close to it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. Still no signal. Time read 7:12 p.m. I glanced back up at the windshield. The ring had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to know it was no longer centered where it had been before. It had slid slightly upward, as if following my line of sight. My skin prickled. The hum grew fainter, thinning like sound drifting away. And then something else caught my attention. A faint glow just above the horizon, far out past the fields. Soft, pale, almost like a reflection of the dying sun, except the sun was behind me now. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't break into pieces. It just hovered low, steady and quiet. The ring responded. It tightened, edges sharpening, condensation drawing itself into a clearer outline. The veins receded, leaving only the circle again, more defined than before. I stood there, frozen, watching the distant glow hold perfectly still while the sky slowly dimmed around it. Another soft vibration rippled through the ground beneath my boots. No birds, no wind. I forced myself back into the driver's seat and shut the door. The inside of the car felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I stared through the ring at the glow on the horizon. The two lined up unnervingly well, as if the ring framed it. Several seconds passed, maybe longer. My sense of time felt slow and stretched. Then the glow shifted sideways, smooth and silent. The ring followed, not sliding across the glass like liquid, but reforming in that new position, as though it had always been meant to sit there. The hum returned, softer but steady. I gripped the steering wheel and swallowed hard, pulse loud in my ears. Fear didn't rush me all at once. It crept in heavy and slow, filling the space behind my ribs. The glow drifted farther left. The ring adjusted again. I finally started the car and pulled back onto the road, heart thudding. As I drove, the glow kept the same distance, never getting closer or farther, just pacing me along the horizon. The ring remained steady in front of my eyes, like a sighting target I couldn't escape. Mile after mile passed in swallowed silence. No radio, no service. Just the road and that quiet light. After what felt like forever, the glow diminished slightly, then again, until it thinned into barely visible haze. The ring on the windshield softened and finally dissolved as well, vanishing without streaks or residue. The hum faded with it. I slowed the car, breathing harder than I realized, watching the last hint of light melt into the darkening sky. Nothing replaced it. No sudden normal noise, just distant crickets returning and the soft rush of tires on asphalt. By the time I reached the edge of town again, my phone signal returned like nothing had happened. A missed call from Mateo. A few regular notifications. The windshield stayed clear the rest of the drive. But every time the glass caught the last traces of sunlight just right, I could almost swear I saw the faint outline of a circle trying to reappear, as if the surface remembered something it wasn't supposed to hold. I woke to find a thin film of dust on my windowsill disturbed in a perfect half circle. Outside, the grass was slightly flattened in the same shape. It took a second to register. My eyes were still foggy with sleep, the room dim and quiet. I sat up and leaned closer to the glass, tracing the curve with my fingertip. The mark was clean, like something had rested there and then lifted away. Not dragged, just placed. When I pulled the curtain back a little more, I saw the impression in the grass below, right outside my bedroom window. Same curve, same smooth edge, no footprints around it, no signs of struggle or movement, just that shape pressed into the dew. My name is Leanne Mercer. I lived alone in a small, weather-worn cottage on the edge of Willow Ridge, a farming town about an hour from the coast. The property sat between tall fields and a narrow stretch of woods that had always made the nights feel quieter than they should. It was early, still gray with morning haze. The air outside looked thick and damp, like fog that hadn't fully decided if it wanted to settle or lift. I pushed the window open and leaned out, half expecting the grass to spring back when I disturbed it. It didn't. The half circle stayed, pressed down as if something heavy but careful had been there for a while. A shiver ran through me, though the air wasn't cold. I stepped outside barefoot and walked over to the spot. The dew chilled my feet. The grass was bent in a clean arc, almost too deliberate. I crouched down and ran my hand along it. It felt normal. No heat, no smell, no crushed stems, just pressed. Probably raccoons, I muttered, even though that made no sense. I straightened up and scanned the area. No broken twigs, no marks from paws. The woods stood still, silent. Not even birds stirred. When I turned back toward the house, my eyes went automatically to the windowsill again. The curve was exactly aligned with the one on the ground, like it had been measured. I went back inside, locked the door out of instinct, and tried to laugh it off while making coffee. The house creaked as usual. The kettle hissed. Everything felt normal again, except that unsettling thought at the back of my head. Around mid-morning, while working remotely on my laptop, a low hum drifted through the air. It wasn't loud, just deep and steady, like distant power lines, but it didn't fade. The windows rattled faintly. When I stood and opened the door, the sound vanished instantly. No trucks passed, no planes overhead, just silence again. Around noon, my neighbor Carmine from down the dirt road called to check if I'd seen his stray goat. I mentioned the weird impression in the grass. He laughed and said deer sometimes moved in strange ways. His voice faded in and out over the phone like bad reception, even though I'd never had issues before. By late afternoon, the sky darkened with rolling clouds. The air turned heavy and damp, promising rain that never came. I kept finding myself glancing toward the window like I expected to catch something still crouched outside. At dusk, the power flickered once, just a blink. The lights returned immediately, but I noticed the outside lamp near my porch stayed slightly dimmer than usual. The hum returned again, low, steady, almost like vibration more than sound. It passed through the floorboards and into my feet. I stood still in the middle of the kitchen, listening, trying to place it. After several minutes, it tapered off slowly like something drifting away. When night finally settled, I stood on the porch watching the cloud cover move slowly across the sky. The moon struggled through the haze, giving everything a dull glow. That was when I saw it. Above the line of trees near the field, something hovered, pale, faint. Not quite solid, just there, low and quiet, like it belonged but clearly didn't. It didn't shine, it didn't flicker. It just existed, slightly brighter than the clouds around it, with no visible structure. The shape reminded me of that half circle from the morning, only now it hung in the air instead of resting on the ground. I held my breath without realizing. It stayed completely still as the clouds drifted past it, breaking around its edges. No sound came from it. No wind. No movement. Just presence. Then, as slowly as it appeared, it slid backward, retreating over the tree line and vanishing into the darkness. The moment it vanished, the air felt empty again, like pressure releasing. I stayed there longer than I should have, letting the night wrap around me. Everything else went back to normal sounds. Crickets, distant dogs, the familiar creak of the porch boards. Later, once inside, the dust on the windowsill bothered me again. I wiped it clean with a cloth. The half circle vanished easily, like it had never been there. But when I leaned toward the glass, I noticed faint streaks running downward, subtle lines like condensation that didn't match the streaks from rain or normal air moisture. I left the light off when I went to bed. Somewhere around 2 a.m, something brushed faintly against the side of the house. Not like a branch, softer. A gentle contact followed by near silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, too frozen to check. When morning came again, bright and clear, the grass outside had returned to normal. No half circle, no flattened patch. The air felt lighter. But the windowsill this time showed something new. A thin, curved line of dust had formed where I'd cleaned it, as though whatever touched it hadn't left yet. And when I stepped outside, I could have sworn the ground felt slightly warm, right where the shape had been. The feeling hit first, like someone had stepped too close behind me without making a sound. I didn't hear anything, but I knew, in a way that made no sense, that something was up there, above the trees. I slowed down and tilted my head back. For a split second, I saw a tiny point of light hanging in the clouds. Then it slid behind a thicker patch and disappeared. I stood on the Crescent Ridge Trail just outside Taos, halfway between the lower switchbacks and the narrow overlook. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains, leaving that gray-blue light that makes everything feel flat and quiet. The air smelled damp from earlier rain, and the dirt had just enough moisture to make my boots crunch but not stick. I hadn't planned on staying out this late. I'd told my sister Maribel I'd be back before dark, but the hike had taken longer than I thought. I figured one more stretch before heading back wouldn't hurt. Still, that tiny light had pulled my attention straight up, even though there was no reason for it. I waited, staring at the clouds, expecting it to reappear. Nothing did. The sky just looked heavy and low, like it was about to sink into the tops of the pines. I shook it off and started walking again. A few steps in, I realized the wind had stopped completely. Not faded, just gone. The branches above me froze mid-sway, and the usual night critter sounds dropped away. No bugs, no distant birds, no rustling. I checked my phone. Signal was gone, which wasn't unusual up here, but the screen brightness dimmed on its own, then brightened again. I adjusted it back, slightly annoyed, and kept moving. Another strange thing. The trail markers I recognized looked a little off, turned sideways like someone had nudged them just enough to look wrong. I stopped beside one and corrected it, then noticed the one further up the path pointing the same slightly crooked angle. A dull hum started, so faint I almost thought it was my breathing. I paused and listened. It didn't come from any direction. It just filled the space around me for a few seconds, then softened until I could barely tell if I'd imagined it. I took a few more steps and felt the pressure again, that sense of being watched from above. I glanced up fast this time. Another tiny light slid between two cloud layers and vanished like it had passed behind a curtain. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was probably a satellite or some plane reflecting light wrong, but the way it moved didn't feel natural. It hadn't blinked. It had just glided. I checked behind me. The trail was empty. The forest leaned quietly inward. No voices, no footsteps. Just my own breathing and the soft scrape of boots on damp ground. When I looked back down, I noticed something that really didn't sit right. Next to my left boot print was another one, slightly shallower, same size, same pattern, but I hadn't walked side by side with anyone. I crouched to look closer. The second print stopped about 2 feet ahead, then picked up again a few steps later. I straightened slowly and scanned the trees. Still nothing. The silence around me felt thicker than before, like it pressed against my ears. I started moving again, picking up my pace this time. My phone vibrated with a delayed message from Eli, a coworker asking if I'd be in tomorrow. The timestamp said it came through 9 minutes earlier, even though I was certain the phone hadn't buzzed before now. The hum returned, a little stronger but still soft. It made the ground feel faintly alive under my feet. I stopped, swallowing hard, and looked up just as that pinpoint light reappeared, sliding across the sky and tucking itself behind another cloud layer. The wind still hadn't come back. The air smelled metallic now, sharp and dry, like right before a storm that never comes. I muttered, "All right," mostly to hear my own voice. It sounded small and thin. My words didn't travel far at all. I turned around and headed downhill. The light stayed above, reappearing every now and then, never getting closer but never vanishing fully either. Each time I noticed it, that tight certainty returned, like it was tracking the path I moved along. Halfway down the trail, my headlamp flickered and briefly went dim. I tapped it and it steadied again, but I could feel my heart thudding harder now. The forest seemed unfamiliar, even though I'd walked this route dozens of times. I checked my watch. It said 8:42. I felt like I couldn't have been hiking that long, but the sky suggested otherwise. 5 minutes later, I checked again. It read 8:53. I reached a clearing where the trees opened into a small stretch of rock and low brush. The clouds above moved slowly again, but the air below stayed dead still. The tiny light hovered once more, brighter than before, then slipped away behind the cloud mass like it had never been there. The hum dropped out completely. The silence that followed felt wrong, too smooth, like the world had been muted. I didn't wait around after that. I kept moving, faster now, not running but steady. The trail finally widened, and I could see the faint glow of parked cars down near the base. Real light. Normal light. As I made my way down the final slope, the wind returned in small gusts, carrying the normal mountain smells with it. Leaves rustled, and somewhere a bird chirped once. It all felt like someone had flipped a switch back on. When I reached my car, I stood there for a moment, breathing out slowly, waiting for that strange pressure to return. It didn't. The sky looked ordinary again, just clouds and dark. I drove home without checking the rear view too much, even though the urge stayed there. Inside my apartment, everything sounded normal. The fridge hummed, the floorboards creaked, and my phone finally showed full signal again. Later, laying on my couch, I checked the photos I'd randomly snapped during the hike. Most were blurred or dark, but one, taken when I didn't remember lifting my phone, showed the tree line and a faint point of light higher than it should have been, softened by cloud. I turned the screen off and set it face down, letting the quiet settle back in around me, knowing I had no clue what I'd seen. Just the feeling that whatever it was had been calmly watching from somewhere above the clouds. I noticed the star wasn't moving like the others while I was lying on the hood of my car trying to cool off. The day had been brutal, one of those dry Nevada afternoons that felt like the air itself was made of dust. By the time I reached the gravel pullout along Route 50, the heat finally started bleeding away, leaving the kind of cool that made your skin feel tight and awake. The road was empty, no cars for miles, just sagebrush, open land, and a wide sky that always felt too big to fully take in. My name's Everett Rowe, and I'd stopped there more out of habit than intention. Used to do it when I got overwhelmed. Just pull over, stare up for a bit, let my brain slow down. That night felt perfect for it. No clouds, no moon, just a clean black sky filled with points of light. I lay back with my arms folded under my head and let my eyes adjust. The stars sharpened slowly, the longer I stared. The silence felt deep but comfortable, broken only by the faint ticking of my car cooling down and an occasional dry gust pushing through the brush. After a while, one of the stars caught my attention. It wasn't brighter than the rest. It just felt off, like it wasn't quite following the same invisible path as the others. I focused on it more and realized it hadn't shifted at all compared to the rest of the sky. Everything else drifted, subtle but steady. That one didn't. I frowned and pointed a finger at it, tracking carefully. "Come on," I muttered. "Move." I figured maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I blinked a few times and looked elsewhere, then back again. Still fixed. A few seconds later, it twitched. Not flashed. Moved. Just a slight sideways nudge, then paused again. My stomach tightened a bit. I sat up slightly, resting my elbows on the hood, eyes locked on that single point of light. It looked ordinary, like any other star, except for that faint movement. Then it shifted again. This time in a short diagonal line, like a lazy pen stroke moving upward and left. It didn't streak, didn't fade, just slid. My pulse picked up, slow and intentional, like a quiet alarm going off deep in my chest. "Okay, that's not normal," I whispered. The star paused again, perfectly still for a few seconds, then moved in the opposite direction, tracing a smooth zigzag through the empty space around it. Not fast, not erratic, just deliberate. There was no sound, no plane noise, no flicker of light below, just silent movement that didn't line up with anything I knew the sky was supposed to do. My phone buzzed faintly beside me on the hood. A text from my friend Kieran, who'd been driving back from Reno and was supposed to pass by soon. I picked it up and typed, "Hey, I'm pulled off near marker 188. You close?" "5 mins," he replied. I glanced back up at the star. It had stopped again, then shifted once more, another slow zig, another zag. The air around me felt slightly cooler now, like the night had sharpened somehow. Even the distant hum of the highway, faint as it was, seemed quieter. When Kieran's headlights finally appeared in the distance, I felt oddly relieved. Not because I felt in danger, but because the idea of someone else seeing this too meant I wasn't alone with it. He pulled in beside me, gravel crunching softly under his tires. The moment his engine turned off, the night returned to its stretched silence. "You okay?" he called out as he stepped from the car. "Yeah," I said. "Just look up." He tilted his head back, scanning lazily at first. "What am I looking for?" "That star right there," I said, pointing directly toward it. "Watch it." He squinted. "Which one? They all look the same. The one that's not moving like the rest. It looks fine to me. Just wait." As if it heard us, the star slid once more, a small zigzag, careful and smooth. "There," I said quickly. "Did you see that?" He narrowed his eyes. "It moved?" Yeah, it stopped now. We both watched it in absolute silence. It didn't move again. Not a single twitch. It just sat there, blending completely back into the quiet pattern of the sky, indistinguishable from every other point of light. You sure that wasn't just your eye? He asked after a moment. I watched it zigzag, I said. Twice. It wasn't a plane. He shifted his stance. I didn't hear anything. Neither did I. We stood there longer than needed, staring upward like it might suddenly reveal itself again, but the sky held still. No more strange movement, no shifting, no drifting, just stars behaving the way they always had. Kieran eventually shrugged. You've been out here too long, man. Terrain messes with your brain. Yeah, I murmured, but my chest still felt tight in a quiet way. We leaned against our cars for a bit, Russell talking about random things, the drive, the heat, the slow week, but I kept glancing back up every few seconds, studying the same section of sky. Nothing. Eventually, he said his goodbyes and pulled back onto the road, taillights fading down the long, dark stretch. I stayed another 10 minutes after that, refusing to let curiosity completely win, but not ready to shake it off either. The star didn't move again. Still, as I walked back around to the driver's seat, the sense of having witnessed something that wasn't meant to perform in front of me lingered quietly under my skin. The drive home passed without incident. The road stayed empty. The air cooled steadily. The desert folded back into its usual nighttime hush. When I pulled into my driveway and shut the engine off, the normal softness of my regular world came back. Porch light glowing, sprinkler ticking faintly, my neighbor's dog rustling in their yard. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and poured a glass of water, hands still slightly warm from the steering wheel. Everything felt mundane again. Still, out of habit more than fear, I stepped onto my back porch and looked up. The stars stretched endlessly above. None of them moved. None of them zigged or zagged. They just existed, steady and distant and quiet. I stayed a minute longer anyway, just to be sure, before finally heading inside and letting the door close gently behind me. The faint clicking pulled me out of sleep in the softest way, like something tapping rhythmically just outside the window. I opened my eyes and lay still, listening. The room was dark except for the pale digital glow of the alarm clock on my nightstand. 3:17 a.m. The clicking continued, slow and steady, like a quiet mechanical sound that didn't belong to any appliance in the house. My name's Rowan Ellerby, and I lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of Pine Hollow, about 15 minutes outside Larchmont. It was the kind of place people called peaceful during the day and too quiet at night. No street lights, no close neighbors, just trees, gravel, and wind most of the time. But this wasn't wind. The clicking had a pattern. Soft, controlled, almost deliberate. I pushed the blankets aside and swung my feet onto the cold floorboards, keeping my movements slow so I didn't fully wake the house. The sound came from outside my bedroom window, which faced the tree line. I stepped closer and gently pulled the curtain back. A soft glow drifted between the branches, not bright enough to illuminate the ground, but clear enough to be seen. It moved sideways, sliding slowly behind the tree trunks like it knew exactly where to go. Not bobbing, not flickering, just gliding. The clicking stopped. I held my breath, staring into the dark. The glow slipped farther into the woods and then vanished behind the thickest cluster of trees, leaving the forest pitch black again. My heart beat slow and heavy in my chest. The night returned to silence. I stayed there for a full minute, waiting for the noise to resume or the light to return. Nothing happened. It was probably just some animal in a reflection, I muttered, even though I didn't believe it. I stepped back from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself. The quiet pressed in again. I strained to hear anything else outside. A breeze. Leaves. Anything normal. Nothing. Eventually, I lay back down, telling myself I'd imagined most of it. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, pale morning light filtered through the curtains. The first thing I did was check outside. No glow, no disturbance, just dew on leaves and the faint mist that always lingered around the base of the trees early in the morning. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling. Every creak of the house, every distant rustle of branches made my attention snap toward the window. That night, I made a habit of locking every door, double-checking the latch on the windows, and turning on the porch light earlier than usual. I told myself it was just caution. Sleep came in shallow waves. Then, around the same hour, the clicking returned. It was softer this time, but clearer. A precise tick-tick-tick, not irregular like twigs snapping or leaves brushing wood. It sat just beyond the edge of the window like something patiently waiting. I didn't move right away. The sound shifted slightly, then paused. My pulse picked up. After a few seconds, it started again, lighter now, almost careful. I forced myself to slide out of bed and step over to the window, dread coiling tight in my stomach. I pulled the curtain back slowly. The soft glow was back, slightly brighter than the night before. It drifted along the outer edge of the tree line, lower now, closer to the ground. Still silent, still smooth, still wrong. Whatever created it never revealed itself. The clicking stopped as the glow moved, as if linked somehow. The light hovered briefly, just long enough for my chest to tighten, then slipped back into the woods, swallowed by shadow. Gone again. I stayed frozen at the window, barely breathing, eyes scanning the now empty darkness. Nothing followed. The rest of the night dragged on with no further noise, but I never truly slept again. Morning light eventually crawled in through the trees like a slow forgiveness that didn't quite erase the memory. Later that day, curiosity chipped away at fear. I walked along the edge of the woods behind the cabin, careful but needing to know if anything unusual remained. No broken branches, no tracks, no signs of anyone or anything, just untouched forest floor. That evening, clouds rolled in, hanging low and heavy, muting what little moonlight might have offered. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. The clicking didn't come immediately. When it did, it came closer, not pressed against the glass, but close enough that the sound felt intimate, like something just beyond reach. This time, I opened the curtain faster than before. The glow was there again, only now it traced a slower path between the trees, almost observing. I stood there longer, heart in my throat, eyes locked on it as it drifted past the trunk of a pine and disappeared behind another. The clicking returned briefly, then faded. I expected fear to fully take over, but what I felt was more confusion, like being watched by something that refused to fully reveal itself, something content to hover just beyond understanding. The nights that followed remained quiet. No clicking, no glow. Just ordinary darkness and occasional animal sounds that felt normal again. Still, every time I lay down and closed my eyes, part of me waited for that faint mechanical sound to return. The subtle sliding light threading through the trees like it had its own quiet purpose. Weeks passed without incident, but the sense that something had briefly brushed against my reality didn't dissolve. It just lingered, faint and unresolved, like a memory I couldn't place but couldn't forget either. The clouds had been drifting lazily across the sky until one patch just stopped. I was lying on my back on the dry grass behind my townhouse, hands folded over my stomach, using my hoodie as a makeshift pillow. It was one of those late summer afternoons where the heat hadn't fully broken yet, but the worst of it had passed. The air felt thick and warm, buzzing faintly with distant traffic and cicadas. The kind of quiet that usually made it easy to zone out. My name's Jordan Pruitt, and I'd lived in this cul-de-sac in Somerset Ridge for about 3 years. Normal place. Kids riding scooters, dogs barking at fences, lawn sprinklers clicking on and off like clockwork. I'd been watching the clouds drift slowly above, not really thinking much, just letting my eyes follow the gentle motion. Then I noticed one of them wasn't moving. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a pale gray patch, roughly oval-shaped, sitting slightly off-center above the neighboring rooftops. Everything else slid right past it, shifting shape and drifting west the way clouds normally do. But this one didn't budge. I squinted, tracking it for a full minute to make sure it wasn't my imagination. It stayed fixed in the same spot like it was pinned to the sky. My heartbeat ticked up slightly. "That's weird," I muttered. A faint wind tugged at the trees along the fences. Leaves rustled. A lawn chair tipped slightly against my leg. Normal stuff. But that patch of sky remained still. And then a dim light pulsed inside it. Not bright, not sharp. Just a soft, dull glow that flickered once from within the cloud mass, barely visible through its gray surface. I froze. The glow vanished almost immediately, leaving the cloud dull and blank again. I sat up, propping myself on my elbows, eyes never leaving that spot above. "What are you doing?" I whispered under my breath. The rest of the clouds continued their slow drift, reshaping as they passed, but that one stubborn section held its place like it refused to follow the same rules. Then the light pulsed again, slightly stronger this time. Still not enough to light anything around it, just enough to confirm that something inside that cloud was aware enough to announce itself. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere 2 yards over, but the sound felt distant. I got to my feet slowly, not sure why standing felt safer than lying down. The cloud patch remained unnaturally still. Another faint pulse flickered. Then darkness again. No thunder, no aircraft sound, no change in wind. I grabbed my phone from the ground and checked the time. 6:41 p.m. I considered recording it but hesitated. Something about the moment felt too delicate, like trying to capture it might make it vanish or somehow escalate. A breeze passed, warm and slow, brushing my arms. I looked away for 2 seconds, just to check if anyone else in the neighborhood noticed. No one stood outside. No voices. No movement. When I looked back up, the clouds still hadn't shifted. But then a glow inside it lingered a moment longer before fading, almost like the light hesitated. My stomach twisted into a tighter knot. I couldn't tell if fear or curiosity was driving me at that point. The sky around it began looking slightly darker, just the contrast growing more noticeable, like that one patch controlled the brightness of everything near it. I took a slow step backward without realizing I'd started moving. The light flickered again, this time a short series of faint pulses, uneven and subtle, like something struggling to break through the cloud cover. Then went dark. The cloud held steady a few moments more, and finally it drifted, not smoothly, not gradually like the others. It slid sideways just a hair, enough that I noticed it breaking its perfect stillness. The rest of the clouds seemed to relax again around it, flowing naturally. The light didn't appear again. A sensation of tension faded slightly in my chest, but my eyes remained glued to the sky. Minutes passed. The clouds slowly began to dissolve, its edges thinning until it became just another irregular shape, merging with the rest. Nothing happened after that. The world slipped back into its normal rhythm like it had never paused. Still, I didn't trust the calm. I stayed standing there, breathing slow, watching the sky like it might behave strangely again. Eventually, a neighbor walked past the fence with their phone to their ear, chatting casually. Somewhere, the faint whir of a lawnmower rose and fell. I forced myself to sit back down, though my muscles stayed tense. The rest of the evening passed without further disturbance, but the moment replayed itself over and over in my mind. Later, once dusk pushed the orange hue out of the sky and replaced it with cool purple-gray, I noticed another subtle change. The same section of sky from earlier looked faintly darker than everything else above it. Not a cloud this time, just a dim pocket of stillness. I leaned back against the patio chair and watched. It stayed motionless for almost 5 minutes. Then for the briefest moment, a weak light flared inside it again. No flash, just presence. Then darkness reclaimed it. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched the sky and let the unease simmer in silence. It never returned that night. Over the next few days, I kept finding excuses to glance upward when I stepped outside. Most of the time, everything looked normal. But sometimes, in passing, my eyes would linger at that same section of sky just a second too long, waiting for something that might never come again. Nothing like it ever repeated exactly. The clouds flowed like clouds should. The wind felt normal. But every now and then, when the light hit just right and the sky looked a little too calm, I felt that same small prickle of awareness crawling up my spine, like the sky itself had briefly woken up, and then pretended nothing had happened. A dark shape slid across the stars so smoothly that at first I thought my eyes were just tired. I'd been laying on the hood of my car in the middle of the High Mesa turnout, the spot a few miles outside of Arroyo Vista, where the light pollution finally drops off. It was late summer, still warm even after sunset, and the sky looked clear enough that the stars felt close. The air carried that dry, dusty smell you only get out there when the heat finally lets go. I'd come alone, which wasn't unusual for me. Stargazing was my way of shutting my brain off after a long week at the hardware store. No phones, no music, just quiet and the sky. When the shape first moved overhead, it wasn't dramatic. It didn't flash or sparkle. It simply erased the stars behind it for a few seconds, like someone dragging a shadow across the night. I lifted my head slowly. The shape glided from east to west, wide and soft-edged, darker than the space around it. Not a plane, not a helicopter. It made no sound at all. No whine, no rumble, nothing that fit anything I'd ever heard. I rolled off the hood and stood up, eyes tracking it. It kept moving at the same even speed, never wobbling, never changing rhythm. It didn't blink or show any lights, just absence where the stars should have been. My name's Dominic Salazar. I'd grown up in that area and knew the difference between normal aircraft and weird shadows passing over a sky full of stars. This thing didn't fit any of it. I leaned against the driver's side door and kept watching. The shape eventually slipped beyond the brighter band of stars and into the darker stretch toward the horizon where the desert met the hills, and then it was gone. No fade, no reveal, just empty sky again. I waited, half expecting something else to follow it, but the world stayed quiet. Crickets chirped faintly. A breeze brushed past, barely cool. I told myself I'd imagined it. Long day, restless head, nothing more. So I climbed back onto the hood and stared upward again. 10 minutes passed. Then the stars dimmed slightly, just for a heartbeat, like someone turned a dial down and back up again. Not the whole sky, just a wide patch almost directly overhead. I sat up slowly. The air felt heavier against my skin, like pressure building before a storm, except the forecast had been clear all night. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. Then it happened again. That same smooth, silent movement passed across the sky, this time directly above me. Closer. The shape wasn't sharp enough to define, but it was definitely there. A broad shadow slipping over constellations I knew well enough to notice when they disappeared. I strained to see its outline, but the edges blurred like it didn't want to show itself fully. No sound, not even the faint rush of air. It glided past, slow and measured, like it had time. My heart started thudding harder. Not from panic, but pure confusion mixed with something colder underneath. I wasn't scared yet, just unsettled in a way that felt quiet and deep. When it cleared the stars again, the sky returned to normal, but the stillness lingered. A minute later, my phone buzzed beside me on the hood. I picked it up instinctively. No signal. That didn't make sense out there. Even in bad pockets, I usually had something. I slid it back down without checking again and kept staring upward. The desert fell into an odd quiet then. No crickets, no brush rustle. Even the faint sound of wind vanished. The sky looked the same, but it felt like I was being watched by something that had no reason to announce itself. Then, far above, a pale flicker appeared, faint and almost shy. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, just a soft point that hung there unmoving. I didn't blink. The dark shape returned beneath it, moving even slower now, drifting in a line that didn't follow any normal path. It didn't cast shadows or block moonlight because there wasn't any strong moon that night. It only swallowed small islands of starlight as it went. My throat went dry. I whispered without thinking, "What are you?" No response. The flicker above dimmed slightly, then both the dark shape and the light slid toward the edge of the sky, gradually leaving my view like something backing out of a room. I waited. The stars filled in the gaps they'd left behind. The quiet began to feel too big. Eventually, the desert sounds crept back, one by one, cautious and ordinary, like nothing strange had passed through. I stood there for a long time after, just breathing, trying to line up what I saw with anything familiar. I couldn't. Eventually, I got into my car and drove home, the headlights carving narrow tunnels through the night road. The dashboard clock showed I'd been out there almost 40 minutes longer than I realized. When I pulled into my driveway, the sky above my house looked calm and empty. Over the next few nights, I returned to the same turnout, half out of curiosity and half because something in me needed to understand what I'd seen. The sky stayed normal every time, except once, just once, when a faint strip of darkness moved quietly overhead, barely noticeable, like a slow blink across the stars that left no mark behind. My headlights washed over something smooth and pale hovering just above the center of the road like a low floating pane of glass, and for half a second, my brain refused to label it as anything real. It didn't look like fog or dust or a puddle catching light. It looked solid, reflective, perfectly even. As soon as I hit the brakes and leaned forward, it disappeared, leaving only empty asphalt and a faint metallic smell drifting through my open window. I was driving south through the Flint Hills outside Council Grove, the kind of stretch where the road dipped and curved between dark grass ridges and patches of scrubby trees. It was close to midnight, heavy summer air, no wind. I'd taken that route 100 times after visiting my cousin Marco, and there was never anything out there except deer and the occasional farm truck. I slowed almost to a stop, heart thudding, scanning the road like I expected the thing to snap back into place. Nothing. Just blacktop and the weak white glow of my own beams. The smell stuck around though, cold and sharp, like I'd rubbed a coin between my fingers. I told myself it was just glare from a road sign or heat shimmer playing tricks, but the road signs were a mile back, and the night wasn't hot enough for that kind of distortion. The longer I sat there, the quieter everything felt. Crickets that had been chirping through the fields a second ago went silent. Even the faint wind I hadn't really noticed before felt like it had stalled. I eased the car forward again. The smell followed a little, then slowly faded. My mirrors showed nothing behind me, just my own tail lights reflecting off distant grass. A few minutes later, the radio crackled. Not static exactly, more like the sound of a tuning dial being brushed slowly. I hadn't changed channels. It had been playing low local ads before that, and now it was just a soft, uneven hiss. I tapped the dashboard and turned the knob, but it didn't clear. It just got quieter until the speakers went dead. That metallic scent returned in a thin thread through the stale air. I rolled my window up a little, like that would explain anything, and kept driving, trying to focus on the white lines undulating ahead of me. That's when I noticed the clock on the dash looked off. I could have sworn when I left Marco's place it was 10:52. Now it read 11:41, and I hadn't been on the road nearly that long. I glanced down at my phone in the cup holder. No signal. Not even one bar. Just that hollow, no service message glowing on black. That never happened out there unless you went way farther south. The road curved left and dropped into a low valley. As I came down the slope, my headlights caught it again. The surface hovered in the middle of the lane about 10 feet ahead, larger this time, smooth, almost pearly. It reflected my lights clearly, like a faint mirror, but it didn't shine back. Just swallowed the beams like they were sliding off wet stone. No way to judge depth. It felt like looking at something that wasn't supposed to occupy space. I slowed with trembling hands, foot barely touching the brake. The closer I got, the more that metallic scent sharpened, cold and sterile. When I was about 30 feet from it, it drifted sideways. Not forward or back, just slid slowly to the right toward the tall grass, still suspended, perfectly level. Then it faded, like someone lowering the opacity of a film until it was gone. The fields swallowed the darkness whole. I sat there with my car idling, throat dry, trying to process what I'd just watched move away like a thought changing its mind. A low hum crept up through the floorboards. Not loud, more vibration than sound. The steering wheel trembled faintly under my palms. My side mirrors quivered just slightly. The hum deepened for a second, then flattened out into silence. A cloud passed over the moon and the road fell even darker. I swallowed and pressed the gas. The car rolled forward, tires whispering over asphalt. I didn't look to the sides anymore. I just focused on staying steadily between the lines, as if veering even an inch might trigger whatever that thing had been to come back. Every so often I caught flickers in the corner of my eye, like pale reflections far out in the grass, moving parallel to the road. When I tried to focus on them, they vanished. My phone buzzed suddenly on the console. No vibration sound, just the screen lighting up. It was a text from my sister Lila, timestamped 10 minutes earlier. "You okay? You left kinda weird." I stared at it, confused. I hadn't told her I was leaving that late. I typed back, "Yeah, just driving home. Why?" The message sat unsent. "Still trying," blinked beneath it. No signal. The smell of metal crept back again, faint but steady, like it had soaked into the fabric of the night. Another mile down the road, the reflectors along the edge all flashed brighter at once, lining the asphalt with a pale, unnatural glow. Ahead, the same smooth, reflective surface hovered again, lower this time, nearly grazing the top of the road itself. It didn't move as I approached, it just waited, silent and even, occupying space like it belonged there more than the night did. I slowed to a crawl. My breaths came shallow. The inside of the car felt too small. The hum returned, stronger now. The air around me pressed inward, thick and heavy. The headlights bent slightly against the surface, like light folding rather than landing. Then, a few feet before I would have touched it, the surface lifted gently, almost lazily, and drifted upward into the dark sky. It didn't rush, it didn't dart. It ascended straight and steady until my lights couldn't reach it, until even the faint reflection vanished into black. Everything fell quiet again, no humming, no vibration, just the engine idling and my own breathing. The metallic smell thinned, then disappeared completely. I sat there longer than I meant to, hands still clenched on the wheel, eyes fixed on the empty spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, no stars blocked, no shapes moving, no sign of anything strange. Eventually, I forced myself to drive on. The rest of the trip passed in uneasy silence. The radio stayed dead. My phone kept searching for signal. A thin layer of sweat clung to the back of my neck, even though the air had cooled. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my porch light flickered once and steadied. The house looked exactly how I'd left it, quiet, still. As I stepped out of the car, the faintest trace of that metallic scent lingered around the hood, then vanished like breath in cold air. Inside, the clock read 12:06 a.m. My phone pinged finally as signal returned. 3 new texts from Lila, the oldest one timestamped from almost an hour earlier. You left in the middle of the story. Everything good, Eli? I stood there in the quiet kitchen, trying to line it all up in my head, trying to find the moment where time slipped, or the road bent, or that surface appeared. Outside, far off across the fields, something caught the moonlight briefly. A small pale shimmer, then darkness again. I didn't go to the window. The glow woke me before I even realized I'd opened my eyes. My bedroom felt dim but not dark, like someone had turned on a soft lamp and pointed it at the ceiling. The problem was, I didn't have any lights on. My curtains were pulled shut the way I always left them, thick enough to block out the street lamp across the road. Still, the walls held this faint pale color, like washed out moonlight, but stronger. I pushed myself up on my elbows and looked around, confused and sleepy. My phone screen on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The light didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It just sat there, quiet and even, filling the corners of the room without any obvious source. I slid out of bed and padded over to the window. The curtains felt cool under my fingers as I pulled them apart just enough to peek through. Outside, above the quiet line of houses across the street, a soft glow drifted slowly through the sky. It wasn't sharp or blinding, more like a wide blur of pale white with a faint yellow tint, moving carefully from left to right like it had all the time in the world. No sound came from it. No wind changed. No dogs barked. It just glided, perfectly smooth, low enough that it passed just above the rooftops. My heart started beating harder, not in panic, just sudden awareness. "What the hell?" I whispered. The glow continued its slow path, sliding past the neighbor's chimney, then over the maple tree by Mrs. Calderon's yard. The whole street stayed asleep. No lights flipped on. No one came to their window. It felt like the world had paused to let this thing pass through. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass, trying to catch more detail. It didn't look solid. It didn't look like any drone or helicopter I'd ever seen. It didn't cast a clear beam or shadow, just this floating smear of light that moved too smoothly to belong to anything mechanical. It finally drifted behind the row of houses at the far end of the block and vanished without a trace. The moment it disappeared, my room went dark again. I stood there, eyes adjusting, listening for anything that might follow. No hum, no echo, just the faint ticking of my old wall clock and the low hum of the fridge down the hall. I stayed by the window another minute, staring into the quiet streets like maybe it would come back. Nothing happened. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up, trying to convince myself it had been a dream fragment slipping into reality. But my sheets were cool. My room smelled the same. My dog, Waffle, slept curled at my feet, breathing slow and steady. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the room faintly brighten again. Not as strong as before, but enough that the ceiling pale-washed color returned just a little. I sat up immediately. The glow had returned, now lower, sliding more slowly this time, as if it decided to take a longer look. I got up again and pulled the curtain aside. It moved across the sky with the same deliberate calm, drifting behind the rooftops and disappearing into the darkness beyond the far yards. Still silent. Still smooth. Still wrong. I checked my phone again. 3:29 a.m. My stomach felt tight, but not scared in a way I could easily explain. It felt like that moment before someone speaks directly to you in a quiet room. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the neighborhood slowly return. A distant car passed. Pipes clicked as the heater cycled. Somewhere, someone coughed. By sunrise, everything looked normal again. The sky was clear and washed pale blue, the kind that made you second-guess anything strange that happened overnight. Kids walked past on their way to the bus stop. Mrs. Calderon watered her petunias like always. The world had reset. Still, I kept watching the upper edge of rooftops whenever I stepped outside. Later that afternoon, I texted my friend Mateo about it, half joking, half not. He told me I probably caught a weird reflection or weather balloon, something normal I just never paid attention to before. I wanted to believe that. But when night fell again and the house went quiet, I felt myself staying more alert than usual. I didn't turn off my bedside lamp until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. Sometime long after midnight, the glow returned. This time it didn't wake me with brightness. It woke me with the strange absence of darkness. I opened my eyes and saw the corners of my room lit the same pale way as before. My body tensed before my mind fully caught up. Again, I moved to the window. Again, the soft drifting glow floated just above the homes, but now it moved slower, like it lingered. It passed over the roof of my own house, so close I felt like if I reached up, I might touch whatever surface emitted that light. Still no sound. Still no clear shape. Just this wide, floating presence sliding past with quiet certainty. I felt watched, not by eyes, not by something I could see, just the sensation of being noticed. The glow paused briefly, almost imperceptibly, hovering just beyond the roofline like it hesitated. Then it continued drifting, easing behind the distant houses and dissolving into night again. The room returned to full darkness, leaving me standing alone at the window, unsure if my breathing had been that shallow the whole time. I didn't tell anyone else after that. Not because it felt unbelievable, but because I couldn't find the right way to describe how quiet it had been, how smooth, how carefully it moved, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as everything else around it. For the next few nights, nothing happened. No glow, no faint light creeping through the curtains. Just a normal black sky and the steady low buzz of sleep. Eventually, the tension faded slightly, but every night when I lay down, my eyes stayed on the faint outline of the window just a beat too long, waiting to see if that soft, drifting light would return and glide past my home again, silent and slow, as if it had simply taken a detour through my street for reasons I wasn't meant to understand. My shadow stretched out across the cracked sidewalk in front of me, suddenly twice as long as it should have been, even though the streetlight above hadn't flickered or shifted. It looked warped, like it belonged to someone taller, someone standing at a different angle. I slowed to a stop and stared down at it, waiting for the light to change or for a car to pass and mess with the darkness. Nothing happened. After a few seconds, the shadow slid back into its normal shape, neat and predictable again. I stood there for a minute, half expecting it to stretch again. It didn't. The street stayed quiet. My name was Elise Navarro, and I'd been walking home from my sister Maribel's place a few blocks over. It was late but still warm, that thick summer night kind of warm that clung to everything. The sky was clear, and the neighborhood was half asleep, a few porch lights on, the occasional TV flickering behind curtains. I kept walking, trying to shake the weird feeling that followed that little moment. The light above hadn't moved. I'd checked twice. No wind, no passing cars, no reason for the shadow to behave like that. A dog barked a few houses down, sharp and sudden, then went quiet again. I glanced around, scanning the empty road and the dark driveways. Everything looked normal. 2 blocks later, I felt it again. Not the shadow this time, but that sense that something around me was slightly off. Like the air felt heavier, almost pressed closer to my skin. I slowed down unconsciously, my footfalls softer against the pavement. My shadow shifted strangely again, just a little, stretching sideways longer than my actual body should have allowed. I turned my head toward the streetlight. Still steady, still bright, same angle. I raised my hand and watched the movement below. The shadow lagged by the tiniest fraction of a second before matching my hand. That unsettled me more than the length change. It felt like it wasn't completely synced with me. A faint buzzing noise hummed from somewhere nearby, too low to place. I thought maybe it was a transformer or some electrical box hidden in someone's yard, but it didn't pulse the way those usually did. It was smooth, continuous. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no new messages. The time read 10:28 p.m. As I moved forward, the hum faded. The air felt lighter again, but the quiet pressed in. No crickets, no wind, just footsteps and distant traffic far away. When I reached the corner near the small neighborhood park, I noticed the shadow misbehaving again. Longer, too sharp. It stretched toward the grass like it wanted to slip off the pavement. A distant light glowed faintly beyond the park, near the line of trees. It wasn't one of the usual lampposts. It was lower, softer, pale. It hovered just beyond the branches, but barely noticeable unless you focused on it. I stopped again and stared toward it. The light didn't flicker or move. It didn't cast a beam. It just sat there quietly. My shadow darkened suddenly, as if something briefly passed between me and the streetlight. I looked up instinctively, expecting to see a bird or maybe a drone. Nothing was there, just empty night sky. The glow near the trees dimmed slightly, then returned to its earlier brightness. The buzzing reappeared, sharper now, a faint vibration that seemed to travel through the ground instead of the air. I shifted my weight, feeling the soles of my shoes faintly humming. I took a hesitant step toward the park entrance. The shadow snapped back into perfect alignment, normal length, normal shape. For a second, everything looked ordinary again. Then the glow moved. It drifted a few feet to the right, smooth and steady, as if sliding on invisible rails. The trees didn't sway around it. Leaves didn't react. The light just repositioned itself. I whispered, "Nope," under my breath, but didn't turn around yet. Another step forward. The hum deepened. The glow paused. My shadow stretched again, unnaturally long, pointing straight toward the light now. I suddenly felt watched, not by someone behind me, not by a pair of eyes, just a general awareness that something had noticed me standing there. I hesitated, heart starting to thud harder than it should for a normal evening walk. The glow thinned, almost shrinking, then expanded again. It didn't brighten or dim dramatically, just shifted subtly, like it was adjusting. The streetlight overhead flickered once, not fully off, just a small stutter of brightness. When it steadied, my shadow snapped briefly sideways, then corrected itself. I backed up a step without breaking eye contact with the tree line. The hum weakened slightly, but didn't vanish. The glow remained. A car passed somewhere far behind me, its headlights washing faintly across nearby house fronts. My shadow exploded into weird overlapping shapes for a second, then returned to its elongated form. The glow lowered a little, sinking closer to the trees, partially obscured by branches now. The air felt cold suddenly, damp against my arms despite the earlier warmth. The buzzing softened until it was barely there. Another long moment passed. Then another. Slowly, the glow slid sideways again, deeper into the tree line, and dimmed. The shadow in front of me shortened abruptly, returning to normal proportions. The heavy feeling in the air lifted. The light faded behind leaves and disappeared entirely, leaving the park dark like it always had been. I stood there for several seconds longer, barely breathing, waiting for it to reappear. It didn't. The buzzing finally stopped. I turned around quickly, eyes had blitz, scanning the street behind me. Still empty, still quiet. Same streetlights, same driveways. My pulse stayed fast as I walked home the rest of the way. No more strange shadows, no out-of-place glows. When I reached my driveway and unlocked the door, the porch light cast an ordinary, predictable silhouette across the concrete. Nothing stretched where it shouldn't, nothing lagged. Inside, everything looked normal. Still, settled, familiar. I sat on the edge of my couch for a long time with the lights off, just staring at the window and the slice of night beyond it, half expecting the shadow to move again on its own. My flashlight caught a sharp flash off something metallic about 30 yards ahead, right in the middle of the field. It was too clean and bright to be dew or glass or the moon hitting something random. It looked solid, like the side of a car or polished steel. I stopped walking and stood there, listening. The night was quiet, the kind where even crickets sounded distant. A thin layer of clouds covered most of the sky, so there wasn't much moonlight. I clicked the flashlight again, aiming toward the exact spot. Nothing, just tall grass bending slightly in the breeze. My name's Daniel Rivas. I'd been cutting across the old Kilmer field on my way home from my cousin's place. It was a shortcut I'd taken 100 times, even at night. The farmer who owned it didn't care as long as nobody messed with the crops. It was late summer, hot all day, but the air had cooled off just enough to feel damp and heavy. I walked forward slowly, keeping the flashlight steady. My shoes brushed through the grass, leaving a narrow trail. The spot where the reflection had been looked completely normal now. No metal, no disturbance, not even flattened grass. I stood there and swept the beam in a wide arc. Still nothing. I told myself it had to be something dumb. A beer can. A broken reflector. Maybe my eyes just caught a weird angle of moisture. Even with that thought, I felt off. The air felt thicker than it should have, like my skin knew something before my brain did. I checked my phone, no notifications, no weird time changes. It said 10:47 p.m. I kept walking. A minute later, the reflection happened again. This time, closer, maybe 20 feet ahead. It was brief but clear, that same smooth metallic gleam. I stopped again, my heart starting to beat harder than it should have. "Hey," I called out, half expecting some drunk neighbor or teen to answer back. Nothing responded, no movement, no wind picking up. Just that quiet stretch of rural land with the faint outline of the tree line in the distance. I walked forward, slower this time, my flashlight shaking just slightly. Every step felt heavier, like the ground was softer than usual, even though it wasn't. When I reached the spot, the grass was untouched again. No object, no mark, no sign anyone had been there. Not even a footprint. Behind me, the field was darker than before. The ambient glow from the town lights felt dimmer, like the darkness had grown closer without me noticing. Then I heard it, a low hum. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft vibration that sounded like it was coming from everywhere. It wasn't mechanical exactly, more like a pressure in my ears. I turned slowly in a circle. The sound didn't change. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. A few steps further, the hum deepened just a little. Enough that I noticed it even through my breathing. I aimed the light toward the tree line again and saw movement. Not fast, not slow, just a subtle shift in shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal. It was like a shape that didn't fully catch the beam, as if the light wasn't sure how to touch it. I squinted, trying to force focus. It didn't feel threatening exactly, just wrong. The hum grew quieter. Then the metallic reflection hit again, this time off to my right. I turned fast, heart jolting. Empty grass, no object. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. I felt exposed, like the field had suddenly opened wider than it ever had. I checked my phone again, 11:06 p.m. It hadn't felt like that much time passed. The humidity pressed against my skin, sweat trickled down my side even though I wasn't moving much now. And then something shifted overhead. Not a bird, not wind, just the faintest movement in the clouds where they bulged slightly downward and held there for a second longer than they normally would. A dull glow pulsed behind them. Not bright, just enough to notice. The hum stopped. The glow drifted sideways, smooth and steady, then thinned until it disappeared completely. All at once, the normal sounds of night returned. Crickets, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere closer to the road. The air felt lighter again, like a door had been cracked open and closed without me seeing it. I stood there another minute, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen anything meaningful, trying to replay it logically. Metal reflection, weird lighting, fatigue, overactive imagination. I started walking again, faster now, not quite running, but close. The field no longer felt like a shortcut, it felt like dead space. Halfway across, the hum returned for just a second, softer than before. Enough that the short hairs on my arms lifted, then silence. The path near the road came back into view, gravel crunching under my shoes as I stepped out of the grass. Streetlights flared slightly in the distance, normal and reassuring. I looked back once. The field looked the same as it always had, flat, uneventful, just grass and shadow. No shimmer, no glow, no shape. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. The house creaked the way it always did. The fridge hummed. My phone still showed 11:06 p.m. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Outside, through the window, the sky settled back into its usual quiet. No glow, no movement, but every time I closed my eyes, I could still see that flash of smooth metal sitting in an empty field that never showed what it belonged to. The blackout hit right after dinner. 1 second the lights were on, the next the entire block went dark. No flicker, no warning, just everything shutting off at once. I'd been sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone, but even that died a second later. Not powered down, just black screen like the battery had vanished. It was a hot August night, humid enough that the walls felt sticky, so staying inside without AC wasn't an option. I stepped out onto the porch to get some air. A few of my neighbors were already outside too, standing around looking confused. I remember seeing Mr. Alvarez from across the street lighting a candle on his steps while his wife kept tapping her phone like that would fix it. The whole neighborhood felt wrong without the usual hum of electricity. No porch lights, no TV noise bleeding through windows, no cars passing, just a heavy, unnatural quiet. Even the cicadas, which had been obnoxiously loud earlier, seemed to have gone silent. I walked down to the end of my driveway. The sky looked darker than usual, even for a blackout, like the air itself was absorbing light instead of letting the stars come through. It took my eyes a while to adjust before I could see anything beyond the silhouettes of the houses. I just started wondering if the outage covered more than our block when something flickered overhead. I didn't see it at first. I saw the reaction. Every car on the street, every single one gave a quick chirp. Not a blaring alarm, not the kind that flashes lights, just the soft single note they make when someone hits the lock button on a key fob. 16 cars, all chirping once in perfect sync. A couple people shouted in surprise. I froze where I was. Then I saw it. A faint green glow moving silently across the sky. Not bright, not dramatic. More like a soft smear of light drifting maybe 100 feet up. The shape wasn't clear. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just floated along at a steady pace. Enough to cast the faintest tint on the rooftops underneath it. It made no sound at all. I waited for someone else to react, but everyone nearby was staring at their cars, trying to figure out if it was some sort of electrical glitch. I don't think they even realized the glow was overhead yet. The thing kept moving down the street, and as it passed each parked car, the car chirped. Precise timing, one after another, like the sound was following it. When it reached the corner near the Simmons house, the last car gave its little beep, and then everything went quiet again. The glow kept drifting. It wasn't heading anywhere obvious. It didn't angle toward the mountains or toward town. It just followed the street like it was tracing the road itself. I stepped farther into the yard to keep it in view. When I moved under the open sky, the air felt different. Thinner somehow, like it pressed in on my ears. The glow slowed. For a moment, it hovered directly above the cul-de-sac. Still no sound, not even the faint whir of wind. The color deepened slightly, not brighter, just richer, like the green had more weight to it. That was when my phone vibrated suddenly in my pocket. I grabbed it, thinking it had finally rebooted, but the screen was still black. The vibration wasn't a notification. It felt more like the phone itself shuddering. I looked around to see if anyone else reacted. Mrs. Alvarez had stepped into the street, staring up now, though I wasn't sure if she actually saw the glow or just sensed something above her. Her candle flame kept bending toward it, like a tiny flag in a steady breeze. Then the glow began to move again. Not forward this time. Down. Only a few feet, but enough that I felt my body tense, like it might drop onto the houses. It hovered there, just lower than before, until I noticed something strange. The shadows on the ground were bending toward it, even the faint ones cast by moonlight. They stretched just slightly, like gravity had shifted. The temperature dropped a few degrees. Not cold exactly, but sharp enough that my sweat cooled instantly. Someone shouted behind me, probably one of the teenagers a few houses down, but the sound cracked weirdly in the air. Not loud or echoing, more like the air swallowed most of it. The glow drifted sideways, no turning, no banking, just sliding smoothly, unnervingly, like something being pulled by invisible strings. It moved over the Simmons house, then over their backyard, then toward the small wooded patch behind the cul-de-sac. As it passed the last car on the street, that car chirped again. just once, like a final acknowledgement. And then it vanished behind the trees. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone between one blink and the next. The instant it disappeared, the cicadas started up again all at once, like someone hit play on a recording. The air felt normal again. The temperature bumped back up. Mrs. Alvarez's candle straightened. A second later, the power rushed back. Houses lighting up one by one, porch lights flaring, TVs humming to life. People started talking over each other. The teenagers ran into the street yelling about the car alarms. Mr. Alvarez announced that the outage had probably tripped something in all the remotes at once, which made no sense, but everyone nodded anyway. I didn't say anything. I walked back to my porch, sat down, and just listened. Trying to convince myself it had been some weird electrical phenomenon. A transformer surge reflecting off clouds or something. Anything normal. Then my phone lit up on its own. The home screen appeared like nothing had happened, but the time jumped from 9:47 to 9:53 the instant it turned on. 6 minutes gone while the phone was dead in my pocket. I didn't mention that part to anyone either. A few nights later, I went outside again, just to breathe the air and see the sky after a long day. Everything was calm, quiet, normal, but when I stood near the street, my phone vibrated again. No notification, no call, just that same strange, empty buzz. I looked up without thinking, nothing there. No glow, no disturbance, just a clear night sky, but every car on the block chirped once. Soft, perfectly timed, one after another, following something I couldn't see. The water was so still that morning it looked more like glass than a lake. I remember that clearly. It was early, around 5, one of those September mornings where the cold sits right on your skin, but the air smells clean enough that you don't mind. I'd driven out to Cedar Basin to fish before work, something I didn't get to do often anymore. I parked near the south shore, hiked down the slope, and set up near a cluster of reeds where the trout usually bit. There was a faint mist on the surface, drifting in patches. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had that dim bluish color that hinted morning wasn't far off. The only sound was the occasional plunk of my lure hitting the water and the soft rustle of the reeds. I was alone, at least as far as I knew. I just cast out again, letting the line settle when I noticed something beneath the surface. At first, it was just a tiny point of brightness, like someone had dropped a waterproof flashlight way down in the lake. I assumed it was a reflection, maybe from a star still hanging on above the horizon. It traveled and it moved. It traveled in a perfectly cutting under the water, and it cut no ripple with rill, no disturbance, just this sharp white point slipping through the dark, too fast to be a swimmer, too steady to be a fish. And definitely not a boat. Boats don't glide underwater. I stood up, squinting, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the point kept going, and as it got closer to the shore, I realized it wasn't just light reflecting off something. It was its own light, bright enough that it glowed through the water like a spark. Then it stopped, dead stop, as if it hit an invisible wall beneath the lake. The hairs on my arms lifted. The whole air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, even though the sky was clear. Before I could make sense of it, the light jerked upward, not rising like a bubble or a fish surfacing, shooting, a straight vertical line, fast enough that I barely saw it cross the surface. There was no splash, no ripple, nothing that made physical sense. One moment the light was under the water, the next it was in the air, leaving a faint streak behind it like a camera exposure. It climbed so high, so fast that by the time I'd blinked, it was already above the tree line. Then it just vanished into the sky, swallowed by the dim blue above me. I stood there for a long time, rod dangling in my hand, waiting for something to follow. Sound, wind, anything. The lake stayed perfectly calm. I reeled in my line and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of drone underwater? But drones don't move like that, and they don't shoot out of the water silently. And who would be flying one in the dark at 5 in the morning in the middle of Cedar Basin? I was still staring at the lake when something else felt off. The mist that had been drifting across the water earlier had frozen in place. Not literally frozen. It wasn't solid. But it wasn't moving. It just hovered there, like time had paused for it. The air was still, yet the mist stayed in these perfect, unmoving shapes. Then, slowly, it began to drift again, as if whatever had disturbed it was gone. I packed up sooner than I planned. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I kept glancing over my shoulder on the hike back up the slope, expecting to see another light move under the surface or something watching from the trees. When I got to my truck, the radio flickered. Not on and off, just a tiny hiccup in the static of the unused channel I normally kept it on during the early mornings. A half-second skip, enough that I noticed. Then, as I pulled out onto the dirt road, the truck's dashboard lights dimmed. Only for a second, just long enough to make me take my foot off the gas. I drove home without turning on the radio again. For the rest of the day, everything felt slightly off kilter. At work, my coworker Sam asked if I was sick. I told him I was fine, just tired. I didn't bring up the light. I couldn't picture how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. The next morning, I went back to Cedar Basin. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I thought the lake would look normal in daylight and I'd be able to laugh it off. But the moment I got out of the truck, something felt wrong. Birds usually chirped around there at sunrise, jays, sparrows, the occasional hawk. That morning, nothing. Total silence. The kind that feels heavy, like sound is being swallowed. I walked down to the water and stopped abruptly when I saw the reeds. The tops of them were pressed flat, not like they'd been bent by wind, but pushed straight down, like something had hovered just above them. A perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across. I crouched down and touched the flattened tops. They were cold, much colder than the surrounding vegetation. The lake itself looked normal. No glow, no ripples, nothing unusual, but when I tossed a small stone toward the surface to test the water, it hit with barely any splash, just a tiny plip and then silence. The sound felt muted, as if the air itself was dampening it. I didn't stay long. That night, around 3 in the morning, Hazel, my dog, started whining. She paced near the back door, ears pointed backward, tail down. When I stepped outside with her, the air felt thick, not humid, just heavy, like walking into a room with pressure built up. I looked up at the sky on instinct. There was a faint glow overhead. Not bright, not like a beam or anything dramatic, just a soft white patch drifting between the stars. Warmer in color than the moon, cooler than a streetlight. It moved slowly across the sky, in the same direction the light in the lake had shot. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the night wasn't cold enough for that. Hazel pressed against my leg, trembling. The glow faded as it crossed behind a cloud. I waited for it to come out on the other side. It didn't. The cloud itself dimmed, like the glow was still behind it, but when the cloud drifted away, the sky was empty. I stayed outside until Hazel tugged me back toward the house. A few nights later, I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no dream, nothing obvious, just that feeling of suddenly being awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:42 a.m. Out of habit, I looked toward the window. For the briefest moment, less than a second, I saw a faint white reflection flicker across the glass, as if something bright had moved outside. When I sat up to look, the yard was dark, totally still. I checked the clock again, 3:45 a.m. 3 minutes gone. Not a long time, but long enough that I knew I hadn't looked away or fallen asleep again. It was just missing. I still fish at Cedar Basin sometimes, but never before sunrise. I can't bring myself to sit alone by that water in the dark, waiting for something to move beneath it. And every once in a while, usually on clear nights, I'll see a faint patch of sky drift. Not a cloud, not a spotlight. Just a soft blur sliding between the stars. Always moving in the same direction. I noticed the thing right after I turned on to Ridgewood Loop, the part of Morning Run where the houses thin out and you can see a big stretch of sky over the elementary school. It was early, maybe 6:05 a.m., and cold enough that my breath looked like steam. The sky was this washed-out gray blue, the kind you get on winter mornings in Oregon when the sun isn't up yet, but the clouds are already glowing. I was halfway through mile 2 when something bright caught my eye above the roofline of the school. At first I thought it was Venus, but it was too bright and it moved. Not fast or anything, just drifting in a lazy diagonal, like a satellite or a high-altitude balloon. I slowed my pace, then eventually stopped near the bike racks. I pulled my earbud out and just watched it for a minute. It didn't blink or pulse like a plane, and it didn't arc like something re-entering. Just a steady, white point gliding silently. A woman walking her dog came around the corner. She didn't look up, just tugged the leash and kept moving. I wanted to ask if she saw it too, but it felt weird to bother her at that hour. I kept watching. The dot drifted right, slowed, then stopped. I don't mean it slowed to a hover. I mean it stopped dead in the sky, like someone hit pause. I thought maybe it was an illusion, like maybe it just happened to align with something, but the clouds behind it kept moving, sliding past in slow streaks. My first stupid thought was that my eyes were shaking from running. I blinked hard a couple times. It didn't budge. A few seconds passed, maybe 10, maybe 15, and I felt this pressure in my ears. The same thing I get sometimes when I drive up the mountains too fast. Not painful, just wrong. I swallowed and popped them, but it didn't go away completely. The point of light stayed perfectly still. I pulled out my phone and tried to zoom in, but against the bright sky, it just looked like a little glowing pixel. I lowered the phone again and stared with my naked eyes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a drone, I thought. But no drone I'd ever seen could hold position that high or that steady. And there was no sound, not even the faint buzzing a drone should make. A thin strip of cloud drifted toward it from the west. It was the kind of cloud that's almost transparent, just a long smear of white stretching across the sky. As it got closer, I caught myself holding my breath, waiting to see the dot either dip below it or blur through it. The cloud passed in front of the spot, and the spot vanished. Not dimmed, not blurred. Gone. The cloud slid away a few seconds later, and the sky behind it was empty. No bright point. No anything. I waited. 30 seconds, maybe. My fingers got cold around my phone. I scanned back and forth across the sky, trying to find it again, but there was nothing. I shoved my phone in my pocket and started running again, but it completely threw off my rhythm. My legs felt stiff, and every time the sky opened between houses, I found myself glancing up. I tried to brush it off. Weird atmospheric reflection, satellite catching sunlight at a weird angle, eye floaters, whatever. I wasn't in the mood to start my day with something unexplainable. I reached the park at the edge of the neighborhood a few minutes later. Normally, I loop around the gravel trail twice before heading home, but as soon as I stepped under the trees lining the entrance, something felt duller. That's the only word I can think of. The air felt flat. The sound of my shoes on the path sounded muted, like someone laid a blanket over the ground. Even the distant highway noise seemed quieter. Halfway around the loop, I noticed a dog standing completely still on the far side of the field. No owner around. Medium-sized, light-colored, maybe a retriever mix. It wasn't staring at me, it was staring straight up. I followed its gaze. There was nothing there. The dog didn't move, not even its tail. I hesitated, wondering if I should go check on it, but something about the way it stood made me keep my distance. After maybe 10 seconds, it blinked a few times, looked around like it forgot what it was doing, then trotted toward the tree line and vanished between the trunks. That pressure in my ears came back again, stronger this time. I swallowed and rubbed the side of my head, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. Not completely. By the time I finished the loop, the sky looked normal. Gray, streaky, boring. I told myself the whole thing was probably just an airplane headed straight toward me before turning. But the way it froze, the complete stillness, didn't fit with that. I headed home along the same route. When I passed the elementary school again, I slowed down without meaning to. The sky above the roofline was empty. I stood there a moment, catching my breath, waiting for, a glint, a flicker, something. Instead, I heard something behind me, a soft crack, like someone stepping on a thin branch. I turned fast, half expecting to see the dog again. No one was there. Just the playground, the swings barely moving in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. I started running again. As I reached my street, the pressure in my ears finally faded. It didn't pop or release. It just slowly dissolved like it had never been there. Inside my house, everything looked normal. Coffee maker where I left it, running shoes on the mat, the faint hum of the fridge. I tried to shrug the whole thing off as I stretched, but my mind kept replaying that moment. The clouds slid over the light. Later that afternoon, when I went out to check the mail, I found myself scanning the sky again. Not because I expected the light to be there. Honestly, I hoped it wouldn't be. But because some part of me felt like it might show up anywhere, at any time. Completely silent and impossible. Nothing did. But every morning since, when I lace up my shoes and step outside, The first thing I do is look up and watch for anything that shouldn't be able to stop midair, and wait. My smartwatch vibrated for the third time before I even made it to the end of my street. At first, I assumed it was just some glitch. Maybe I'd forgotten to clear a notification or the haptics were acting up again. It had done weird things before after getting splashed during a run, so didn't think much of it. But when I lifted my wrist, the screen was blank. No messages, no reminders, no health alerts, just the time glowing at me like nothing was wrong. I shook my wrist a little and kept walking. The vibration stopped for about 10 seconds. Then it buzzed again. 2 short taps against my skin, the exact pattern it used for incoming texts. I sighed and muttered to myself, "Come on, don't die on me now," and raised my wrist again. Still nothing on the display. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dry, cool, early fall. I was walking back from my friend Andrea's place a few blocks over. She'd asked me to help her move a bookshelf down a flight of stairs, which turned into helping her rearrange half her living room. I was tired, and I just wanted to get home, microwave leftover pasta, and zone out in front of a show. My neighborhood was quiet, suburban, but older. Large maple trees, uneven sidewalks, houses set back behind hedges and low fences. A few porch lights were on, but most places were dark. The sky was clear, except for a thin scatter of clouds drifting toward the horizon. Good visibility. The kind of night when you could see every star that wasn't drowned out by street lamps. My watch buzzed again. Harder this time. Longer vibration, like an alarm. I stopped under a corner streetlight and swiped the screen. Nothing. I held down the button to check for system errors. Still nothing. The watch was acting like it was perfectly normal, but also like it was desperately trying to get my attention. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The second happened a few seconds later when I noticed the speck of light above the street. I don't know how long it had been there before I noticed it. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or a drone or even a satellite, just a faint, dim point, no bigger than a star. But it was low, much too low to be anything astronomical. My first thought was that it was the tip of a radio tower, but there were no towers anywhere near that part of town, and it was sitting perfectly still above the intersection ahead of me, not blinking, not moving, just hanging there. My watch buzzed twice. I looked from the watch to the light, from the light back to the watch. My heartbeat picked up in this uncomfortable, crawling way. I couldn't shake the feeling the two things were connected. Not in any logical sense, but in the way you just know something's wrong before you have proof. I took a few slow steps forward. The light didn't shift. It didn't flicker. It didn't react at all. But my watch buzzed again. 3 sharp pulses. Not any pattern I recognized. I turned in a slow circle, checking for headlights, security lights, electrical transformers, anything that might be throwing some kind of reflection. There was nothing unusual. Just empty street, evenly spaced lamps, silent houses. No movement except the slight rustling of leaves overhead. I thought about calling Andrea, but I felt silly. What would I even say? Hey, my watch is spazzing out and there's a dot in the sky? No way. Instead, I kept walking. Every few seconds, my watch vibrated. Some pulses were short, some long, some felt almost hesitant. It reminded me of someone tapping their finger on a desk while deciding whether to speak. When I reached the intersection, the speck of light hung right above the 4-way stop. Maybe 100 feet up, maybe less. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything below it. The pavement looked exactly as it always did. Smooth patches, cracked patches, a faded crosswalk symbol. Nothing unusual. But the light looked close. Closer than any star had a right to be. My watch buzzed so hard it startled me. I flinched and almost dropped my arm. This time, when I checked the screen, it was glowing white. Just a blank white screen, no icons, no numbers, no backlight bleed, perfectly uniform. I tapped it, swiped, held the button, nothing changed. And the light above me dimmed. Not all at once, more like a slow fade as if someone was turning a knob. I stepped back instinctively, expecting it to blink out or drop lower or reveal some shape around it. Instead, it hovered there, barely visible, then brightened again, back to its original faint glow. My throat tightened. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I forced myself to look away from the light and check around the intersection again. No cars, no people, not even a stray cat or cyclist. Just a quiet residential street and that point of dim illumination hanging above it. My watch buzzed in one long, continuous vibration. I lifted it toward my face and the buzzing stopped instantly. The screen stayed white. Then very slowly it faded back to the regular time display. 9:14 p.m. Like nothing had happened. I didn't move for a long moment. Just listened. Waited. My watch stayed quiet. I forced myself to walk. Not fast, but steady. One foot after the other. I kept my peripheral vision locked on the light, trying not to look directly at it, but needing to know if it moved. It stayed overhead. I rounded the corner onto my street. The light drifted slightly, not downward, not sideways exactly, more like it repositioned itself to stay aligned with me. The movement was so smooth I almost doubted I saw it, like a trick of my eyes. My watch buzzed once. Short, sharp. I broke into a faster walk. Halfway down my block, the light finally moved. It rose, straight upward. Not fast, just steadily climbing through the air. The higher it got, the dimmer it looked, until it was impossible to tell whether it had disappeared or simply blended in with the stars. By the time I reached my driveway, it was gone. My watch didn't vibrate again for the rest of the night. Inside my house, I sat on the couch with the watch off my wrist, set on the coffee table like it might do something if I looked away. It didn't. It stayed on, functioning normally. I restarted it twice, no glitches, no phantom notifications. Later, when I lay in bed, I replayed the walk over and over, trying to rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it really was a drone, one with a very weak light and a completely silent motor, or a satellite caught at a strange angle, or some atmospheric trick, and the buzzing was a coincidence or an electrical issue. Those explanations should have made me feel better. They didn't, because sometimes when I'm halfway to work or the grocery store or Andrea's house, the watch gives one single, unprompted buzz. Just one. And every instinct I have makes me check the sky. I noticed it when I leaned forward to kill the engine. I'd pulled into the overlook just before sunset, the kind that's nothing more than a widened shoulder with a metal guardrail and a small sign telling you the elevation. It sat above a winding stretch of road that cut through low mountains, the view opening up toward a valley full of trees and scattered lights from a town miles away. I stopped there, sometimes on my drive home from late shifts, mostly just to sit for a minute before going back to my apartment. I reached toward the dashboard, and that's when I saw it in the driver's side window. My reflection moved a fraction of a second after I did. It wasn't dramatic. If I hadn't been staring right at it, I might have missed it. My hand moved forward, and my reflection followed just slightly late, like a bad video stream buffering for a split second. I froze, hand hovering. The reflection froze too. In sync again. I straightened slowly, heart picking up. The reflection straightened with me, perfectly matched. I tilted my head to the left, then the right. No delay. Okay, I muttered, feeling stupid. Probably just tired. I'd been working doubles all week. I stepped out of the car and shut the door, the window going dark. Cold air hit my face, sharper than I expected for early fall. The sky was clear but already dimming, the sun low enough that everything had that stretched, flattened look. I walked to the guardrail and leaned against it, staring out over the valley. Cars moved far below like slow insects, their headlights just starting to pop on. A few birds cut across the sky, heading somewhere with purpose. After a minute, my heart rate settled. I went back to the car, meaning to grab my phone. That was when it happened again. I reached for the door handle, and in the reflection, my arm lagged. This time, it was more obvious. My hand closed around the handle, and my reflection's fingers didn't curl until a beat later. It wasn't a blur. It was a clean delay, like the reflection was watching me and copying what I did instead of mirroring it. I pulled my hand back fast. The reflection followed a moment later. I stepped away from the car entirely, breath shallow. The reflection did the same, but late. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that makes the world feel unreal for a second. I pressed my palms together, grounding myself, and watched the reflection do it just after I had. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was close. "Get it together," I said out loud. My reflection's mouth moved after the sound left my lips. I couldn't hear it, obviously, but seeing the delay made my stomach drop. I backed away until I was out of the reflection entirely, standing near the guardrail again. My hands were shaking now. I shoved them into my jacket pockets and stared hard at the horizon instead of the car. That's when I noticed the light. At first, it looked like a star that had come out early. A single white point low in the sky, just above the far ridge line. Too bright for an airplane, too steady to be anything obvious. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The air felt strangely still. The wind had paused. The light drifted sideways. Not fast, not slow, just smooth, perfectly level, without blinking. I forgot about the reflection for a moment. All my attention locked on that point of light. It didn't leave a trail. It didn't change brightness. It just moved, stopped, then moved again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch hard enough that my shoulder hit the guardrail with a dull clang. I pulled the phone out, half expecting some kind of alert. No notification, just the screen lighting up. When I looked back at the sky, the light was still there, hovering. I glanced at the car window again without really thinking about it. My reflection was back in sync. I lifted my hand slightly. The reflection lifted it at the same time. No delay. I felt a tight, cold knot settle in my chest. I looked back at the light. It was dimmer now, like it was being turned down rather than moving farther away. The edges softened until it was hard to tell where it ended and the sky began. Then it vanished. Not shot away, not blinked out, just gone. The moment it disappeared, the wind came back. A faint breeze rustled the trees below, and I realized how quiet it had been before. The normal sounds of the world rushed in all at once, too loud for a second before settling. I stood there longer than I meant to, replaying everything in my head, trying to find a way to make it normal. Eventually, I got back in the car and drove home. I kept my eyes on the road the whole way, afraid to look at my reflection in the side mirrors. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next night I stopped at the same overlook. I told myself it was because it was on the way and I liked the view. That wasn't true. I wanted to see if it would happen again. I parked in the same spot and sat in the car for a full minute before moving, watching my reflection carefully. Everything lined up. No delay. I exhaled slowly and opened the door. Outside, the air felt heavier than the night before. Low clouds moved overhead, catching the city glow and smearing it across the sky. I leaned against the car, arms crossed, watching the valley. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, I started to relax, embarrassed at myself for expecting something. I turned toward the car to leave. My reflection didn't turn with me. It stayed facing the valley for a fraction of a second before following. My pulse jumped into my throat. I moved my arm experimentally. The reflection lagged again, clean and unmistakable. I couldn't look away this time. Fear pinned me in place, but curiosity was worse. In the reflection, my eyes didn't feel like mine. They weren't doing anything different exactly. They just felt focused, like they were paying attention to something I wasn't. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look back at the sky. The light was there again. Same spot as before, same color, same impossible steadiness. The delay in the reflection seemed to stretch as the light brightened slightly. When I lifted my hand, it took almost a full second for the reflection to catch up. I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that the reflection wasn't lagging behind me. I was lagging behind it. The thought hit me so hard my knees felt weak. I grabbed the car door to steady myself, cold metal biting into my palm. The light drifted upward this time, slowly rising until it was just below the cloud cover. The air pressure shifted again, my ears popping sharply. My reflection raised its hand before I did, just barely. A twitch of fingers, then my own hand moved without me consciously deciding to. I yanked my arm back, gasping. The light dimmed. The reflection snapped back into perfect sync. I didn't wait. I got in the car, slammed the door, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights cut across the empty overlook, and everything looked painfully normal. I drove home too fast, glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting it to move on its own. It didn't. I didn't stop at the overlook for weeks after that, but I started noticing smaller things. My reflection in store windows hesitating when I turned too quickly. My bathroom mirror feeling just a beat off when I brushed teeth late at night. Never as obvious as at the overlook. Just enough to make me question myself. I avoided mirrors when I could. One evening, I was washing my hands at work when a coworker named Jenna asked if I was okay. She said I'd been staring at myself like I didn't recognize who I was looking at. I laughed it off. I stopped driving that route home altogether and took a longer way through town. I told myself distance would help. It did for a while. Months later, I found myself back on that road by accident after a detour. Without thinking, I pulled into the overlook again. Old habits die hard. The place looked exactly the same. Same guardrail, same sign, same view. I sat in the car and stared at my reflection. Perfect sync. I stepped out, heart racing. Nothing happened. I stood there until the sky darkened fully, watching for the light. It never appeared. When I turned back toward the car, my reflection moved with me, exactly as it should. I don't know why that unsettled me more than the delays. I left quickly and haven't been back since. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a dark window and feel a brief, awful pause before it moves. It always corrects itself immediately. But I don't look at the sky anymore when that happens. I don't want to know what has to fade for things to line up again.